Welcome, everyone, to the October 12th, 2021 Truckee Town Council. May I have roll call, please? Oh,
Councilmember Pallavi.
missing one.
I'm here. Just keep going slowly.
I'm here. Yes, we'll just take our time here.
Councilmember Romack.
Here.
And we are noting that Vice Mayor Henderson is intentionally absent this evening. But I believe Councilmember Zabriskie will be joining us.
Councilmember Zabriskie.
Here.
Great, thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. So now we are on to public comment. So this is the opportunity, if you have something to say about an item that is not on the current agenda. Now is the time to step up to the podium. You have 3 minutes. The mic should be on, David. So go ahead and give it a test. Please say your name, and if you could also fill out a comment card in the back so we can make sure to get the correct spelling of your name.
Okay, my name is David Diamond. I'm here tonight as a now former co-chair of the Measure T campaign, and I wanted to thank Council for your unanimous support of Measure T and thank the voters of the Truckee Fire Protection District for their overwhelming support. The measure passed by approximately 80%. So we're very happy about that, and I just wanted to say during that opportunity, during that campaign, I had the opportunity to get to know Bill Saline, Chief Saline from the fire district. And I especially wanted to mention to those who voted no on Measure T that I understand why people are apprehensive in our state to agree to additional taxes, property taxes. But I do trust Bill Saline. I trust our fire district. They have a good plan for this. It was a good measure, and I'm very thankful that it passed. I think for the next 8 years, we will see some notable improvements in our surrounding area. So I wanted to thank Council, staff, a lot of staff for town supported it also, and the voters of the Truckee area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and I'll throw my little 2 cents in on Measure T. I really want to thank the core group that made that measure possible. David Diamond, Paco Lindsay, Ward Franzler. There was also special help from Pam Hobday, Jennifer Jennings, and Lori Marquette. So without this dedicated group of individuals, this would not have been as successful as it was. And I'm also really proud of our community for stepping up and supporting this measure. So thank you, community. And you can find more information about the projects that are up and coming at truckeefire.org. Okay.
Hi there. My name is Sam Grossberg, and I'm here today to comment on the short-term rental moratorium. I'm a homeowner and part-time Truckee resident and was an active participant in the short-term rental program from June 2017 until March 2020. When the moratorium comes up for renewal in less than 45 days, I'm asking the council to expand the exemption for renewing existing 2021 registrations to also include registrations from 2020. While I was surprised and caught off guard that the moratorium would affect me as a longtime participant in the STR program, I was encouraged by the thoughtful discussion at the meeting. It's clear that all the council members want to approach the moratorium in a fair way that doesn't harm homeowners like me and continues to support the tourism industry that is so vital to this town. When I moved to California in 2011, I fell in love with North Lake Tahoe. I rented a ski lease with my friends every winter, and by 2017, I had saved up enough money to become a homeowner for the first time here in the Donner Lake neighborhood. Since then, I've been lucky each year to spend an increasing amount of time here in Truckee with my partner, Will. We love it here every month of the year. In 2020, when the pandemic hit and we started to work from home more, Will and I were lucky to be able to spend a much larger percentage of our time here in Truckee. We began preparing the house for a major renovation and so did not sign up for the STR program this year. We also faced permitting delays that I know you are all aware of. It took us over 5 months to receive a permit, which we finally got approved today. When I bought the house, I did make sure that I had enough income to afford the mortgage without short-term renting, since I knew that the political climate could take that option away from us at any time. While I can still afford to pay the mortgage without short-term renting, the potential loss of this extra income is definitely stressful. In 2019, we rented our house on Airbnb for a total of 78 nights and spent many weekends and weeks at the house ourselves and with our friends. Over the last 4 years, our rental taxes have raised over $19,000 for the city. Each quarter, when I pay my transient occupancy tax, I genuinely feel pride in my small contribution to making Truckee the wonderful town that it is for full-time residents, part-time residents, and tourists alike. I love messaging with the families who stay at our house and get to experience Truckee and Donner Lake at times when the house would have otherwise been vacant. I'm hopeful that in the interest of fairness, as discussed at the last meeting, and the extenuating circumstance of the pandemic, that you'll consider this very modest amendment to include an exemption for anyone with a recent short-term rental registration, including in 2020, when the moratorium comes up for renewal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other general public comment? Oh, please step forward, Deirdre. And again, anybody speaking tonight, whether it's on the general public comment or future public comment, please fill out a comment card for us. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Deirdre Henderson. I live in Truckee, and I am the co-leader of the North Tahoe chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. And I'm here to give the Town Council an update on the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which you have generously endorsed twice, once in the last session of Congress and once in this session of Congress. I'd like to let you know what is going on in Congress, really, not the sound bites that we hear every day. And most of this information is public information. It comes from our CCL legislative staff in Washington. So it was clear to us that a freestanding bill via regular order in Congress was not likely to take place this year. There isn't much regular order in Congress this year altogether. But any really significant climate policy was going to be passed in connection with the budget reconciliation process. So according to our Washington staff, the Senate is going to have the biggest role in drafting that budget reconciliation bill. So our strategy was readjusted from the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act to pressing to get carbon pricing into the reconciliation budget bill. So to that end, we had a campaign that started in mid-July and ended the first week of August to demonstrate to the Senate that carbon pricing is a popular policy. Our goal was to have 10,000 contacts, calls and emails to our 100 senators to demonstrate that fact. By the end of the campaign, we had made over 52,000 contacts with the Senate. Shortly thereafter, a document was leaked from the powerful Senate Finance Committee that contained a list of the climate policies that they were considering, and a carbon fee and dividend policy very close to the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act was included on that list. So, of course, we don't know for sure whether the CCL campaign had anything to do with that, but 52,000 contacts, just saying. Last week, Senator Ron Wyden, who is the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, was asked by the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to draft carbon pricing legislation.
Thank you, Deirdre. I'm sorry, the 3 minutes is up.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for the update. We really appreciate it and look forward to more. Are there any other general public comments? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to presentations. And the first one is a proclamation for breast cancer awareness. Is Dr. Capel here this evening? Great. I'll meet you at the podium.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Copel. I'm a local hematologist and medical oncologist.
Well, Doctor, thank you for joining us this evening. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Okay, so whereas October 2021 is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, October 13th, 2021 is Metastatic Breast Cancer Awareness Day, and October 15th, 2021 is National Mammography Day. And whereas breast cancer is the most common kind of cancer in women, the #1 cancer that causes death in women, and about 1 in 8 women born today in the United States will get breast cancer at some point. And breast cancer is the #1 diagnosed cancer at the Tahoe Forest Cancer Center. And whereas the good news is that many women can survive breast cancer if it is found and treated early. A mammogram, a screening test for breast cancer, can help find breast cancer early when it is easiest to treat. And whereas the National Breast Cancer Awareness Month is a chance to raise awareness about the importance of early detection of breast cancer and to make a difference by spreading the word about mammograms and encouraging communities, organizations, families, and individuals to get involved. And whereas those men and women diagnosed with stage 1 through 3 have a 20 to 30% chance of progression to stage 4. And whereas October 13th is designated to raise awareness about stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, since it is the only stage that is fatal, and all women would benefit from a cure so that breast cancer can be categorized as chronic, not fatal. And whereas mammography is recognized as the single most effective method of detecting breast changes that may be cancer long before physical symptoms can be seen or felt, and Tahoe Forest Hospital District will perform over 4,300 screening mammograms and 528 diagnostic mammograms in the past year. And whereas women may receive screening mammograms with no out-of-pocket costs if covered by commercial insurance, Medicare, or Medi-Cal. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the mayor of the town of Truckee that October 2021 is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, October 13th, 2021 is Metastatic Breast Cancer Awareness Day, and October 15th, 2021 is National Mammography Day in and throughout the town of Truckee, and the mayor encourages all Truckee citizens to participate in proactive health screenings and get a mammogram.
That's wonderful.
Thank you so much. And I would, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, she said it all. I mean, you've got it all down. I just want to say I'm honored to be here to receive this proclamation and kind of witness this annual renewed commitment. Breast cancer, it affects too many people, takes too many lives. So having it part of a public conversation really does make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you. And I believe we have some public comment from Silke. Oh, yes. I want to thank Silke for her additional contribution to this proclamation and making it more comprehensive and inclusive. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was waiting for that the entire day. So, thank you for the proclamation, and thank you for working with me on making it a little more up to date. So it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I think we're all aware of breast cancer. Everybody here aware of breast cancer? So that's not what we need. What we need is a breast cancer action month. So we need actions. And the first one we already mentioned, get your mammogram if you're in the age and if it's your, once a year. But also do self-examinations, especially if you're younger than the typical screening age. And also, men can get breast cancer as well. So in women, it's 1 in 8 that will get breast cancer in their life. In men, it's 1 in 800, so the risk is much lower, but there's men dying of breast cancer just the same. The action 2 is, the problem is not the early stage cancer, the problem is the metastatic cancer, which is what I have, because that's the cancer that kills. And I was diagnosed at an early stage, but 1 in 3 breast cancers come back metastasized. Mine is in my bones, and it will kill me way before my time would be up otherwise. So what actions can you take to help me and others? Fund research. So give money to the Cancer Center, give money to UCSF's Cancer Center. There's a great group called Metaviver, like Survivor, just metaviver.org, and you can give money there. Don't buy any of the pink crap because these companies just want to make money off me, and they don't donate any money. So buy the normal colored stuff and spend your money, give your money to research and development so that potentially there'll be a cure for me. Also, buy from small businesses that are run by breast cancer survivors or by cancer survivors in general, because the financial toxicity of this disease is crazy. And also, be aware of us, not just check in with us, especially when people are first diagnosed, they're in la-la land, just the bad one. And so if you show up and clean the house or show up with food, don't say, oh yeah, tell me if I can help you, just go and say, here's this, this is what I'll do for you, when can I come? So that's the greatest action that you can take for everybody. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Silke. I really appreciate you giving that specific advice. Just show up. I think that's probably the key to success in most situations, but specifically that one. So thank you. Michelle, can you join me at the podium? Michelle Prestowitz of Truckee River Watershed Council. So we are also doing a proclamation for Truckee River Day. Whereas the Truckee River, its tributaries, lakes, meadows, and forests are beloved to local residents and visitors alike. Whereas the Truckee River watershed is impaired by 150 years of legacy impacts, such as timber harvesting, construction of the railroad and other transportation corridors, gravel mining, grazing, and dams, resulting in the Environmental Protection Agency of the state of California designating the watershed as polluted. And whereas for 25 of the past 26 years, Truckee River Day brought together hundreds of community members of all ages to work on watershed restoration and protection projects in and around Truckee, reflective of the import of the watershed and our environment in our daily lives. And whereas the goal of the Truckee River Watershed Council is to continue the legacy of Truckee River Day while completing 50 large-scale restoration and protection projects in the next 10 years, so that even with growth and development, our water will be clean, our meadows and wetlands will still be here, our streams and creeks will have healthy populations of fish and birds and other wildlife, and our watershed will be healthy enough to adapt and thrive in the face of floods, wildfire, and drought. And whereas volunteer restoration projects will take place on Truckee River Day in Coldstream Canyon, Martis Wildlife Area, Sage-Hen Forest, Tahoe Donner, and elsewhere in and around the town of Truckee. And whereas the Truckee River Watershed Council is honoring the 26th anniversary with events such as Truckee River Day Fair at the Granite Flat Campground, in addition to several restoration projects. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the mayor of the town of Truckee, does declare October 17th, 2021 as the 26th annual Truckee River Day and Fair, and congratulates the committed citizens of Truckee who join with the Truckee River Watershed Council on this day to protect and restore our beloved river and its tributaries. Thank you. Did you want to say a few words?
I just want to say a few words, and thank you, Mayor Klostad, and to the council members, and to so many of our supporters that I've seen out in past years at Truckee River Day. I'm ignoring my prepared comments. I think what I'm most inspired by is that the Truckee River Watershed Council grew out of a grassroots movement of our local community members and citizens saying they wanted to make a difference, saying that they wanted to improve our watershed. We couldn't count on somebody else to do it. Everybody stepped up 26 years ago to do that, to identify what were the projects, what were the problems, how could we fix them, and how many people did we need, how much seed did we need, how many tools did we need, all of the logistics. And this year, we get to relaunch Truckee River Day. You know, last year, everybody took a stutter step. This year, we get our volunteers back on the watershed. And already, we have 350 volunteers have signed up to come out on Sunday to get the work done. People are itching for that kind of social engagement, for that kind of a service project. And it's really heartening to know that that is what makes our community. All of Truckee River Day developed into the Watershed Council, we've been able to restore thousands of acres of our meadows, our forests, miles of stream, and Truckee River Day specific projects have involved thousands of citizens over the years. And that's really, really inspiring to me. So I want to say thank you to everyone in this room, everyone watching today, all of our volunteers. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Michelle, you should tell everybody how they can sign up on Sunday.
Well, actually,
or unless you're done signing people up.
I had to close registration today because we had such an overwhelming response. But I will say, if you want to just show up on that day, if you go to our website, www.truckeeriverwc.org, click on the tab for Truckee River Day. It'll give you instructions to go out to the Sardine Meadows project. This is out past Boca and Stampede Dams, a huge meadow that we were able to do a massive restoration on this year, and volunteers this year will help with the revegetation process. And we have already about 100 volunteers signed up to be out there, and we could still use more help. It's just a beautiful vista of, you just don't get to see these kinds of meadows in the Sierra very often unless you take a little bit of a trek. And I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a trek, but it's worth it. And I think, Jan, you might, no, maybe you're not at that project. I can't remember. But I believe that, Anna, I believe that you're at Sardine.
I'm signed up for that one. Okay, great. See you all out there. We'll be having fun. And it is so rewarding, actually, year after year to go back and see the willows growing that you planted and the seeds flowering that you scattered, and it's so fulfilling. So I highly encourage everybody to participate.
And I was talking with a Girl Scout troop today. They're bringing their daisies. So what is that? I think they're 6 years old when they're daisies. And I was just reflecting, when I brought my girls when they were that age, they love going back to the sites that they planted. They call it their project, their sites. And out of, I have two daughters, so 2 Girl Scout troops. out of those girls, I know at least 3 of them have gone on to major in environmental sciences. Like, that's a real outcome. We're creating new stewards. You know, they have the knowledge, the experience, and part of that comes from being a 6-year-old spreading seeds. So.
And taking ownership of our own
Yeah,
watersheds.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay, item 5.3, Jen, you have an introduction?
I do. We have another new employee that has joined our team, Elizabeth Morrill. If you could identify yourself, thank you. Today was Elizabeth's first day, so she's jumping right in at Introduction to Council, so we appreciate you being here. Elizabeth is a resident of North Lake Tahoe. Like many of our residents, she came here for a change of pace from the Bay Area when she originally moved up here. And Elizabeth has a master's degree in biology, and part of that coursework was to describe 11 new species of spiders. And she now does that for fun, for friends. So if you're interested or you see an interesting spider, just let Elizabeth know and she can tell you the species. In her spare time, she's learning both knitting and sewing, skills that provide something to do during the winter when you don't downhill ski. She's looking for alternative activities if she doesn't have any spiders to identify. She also enjoys cooking cuisine from other countries, gardening, and listening to live music. As most in-town employees do, she enjoys camping, hiking, reading on the beach, and the occasional thrill of cross-country skiing down the small hill at Sugar Pine. Elizabeth worked for Tahoe City Library for almost 7 years. That's where she's joining us from. And her 2 supervisors raved about her skills. One even went as far as calling her a genius when we did her background. So she has a little bit of a standard to live up to now. We are excited to welcome Elizabeth to our team, and we think she's going to bring very valuable skills of organizations to the clerk's department and records position. So welcome, Elizabeth. Thank you for being here tonight.
Welcome, Elizabeth. Yeah. Okay, Nikki, you're up for 5.4. Oh, good. We get a little presentation.
So on the opposite end of the employment train, we are here to celebrate a coming retirement. And we are celebrating Paula tonight, and Paula has been with the town for 13 years. And in that time, she has made numerous lifelong friends, has been a pillar of the town's finance team, and has been a dedicated employee for the town of Truckee. Paula was not one thing to our team or a person here at the town, and therefore it felt fitting to gather some words from individuals who have shared their time here with Paula to do a proper thank you and illustrate Paula's contribution to the town of Truckee's successes. So Kim's here, so I'm going to let her have her own words after, but I reached out to Mary Fellows, who was our previous HR guru, whom Paula formed a lifelong friendship with. And Mary stated that there was so much she wanted to say about such a magnificent person, but most of it was not work appropriate. She did mention that there may or may not be a pool going of whether or not you actually stay retired this time. Several of our council members will appreciate this one, but Paula is probably one of the town's most dedicated Reno carpoolers and has been for over the past decade. And so I reached out to some of her carpool buddies, and they said that Paula and them spent many hours carpooling together, sat through tons of road closures due to either accidents, construction, or snowstorm. And regardless, Paula always had us laughing. If you have to be stuck in traffic or commute, she can vouch that Paula is 10 out of 10 the best carpool buddy. And I also reached out to Chrissy, who was our previous admin services manager and Paula's manager for over 13 years. And she stated that what sticks out in her mind as she thought back on the last decade of working with Paula was Paula's unfailing dedication to the town's workforce by being the queen of all things payroll. Paula brought something very special to the town. She can't imagine that it's very commonplace to have such a level of trust between the entire workforce and the finance division regarding payroll. Paula took ownership of developing and maintaining that trust with a passion. Everyone knew they could give Paula a call at any time, and she would take that time to explain the intricacies of tax law or what the heck this hours code was all about. Paula developed so many special and valued relationships with so many town employees. She is truly a friend to all. In fact, at her interview with Chrissy, she was even, before she was even a town employee, she was offering to make a special tea remedy for Chrissy when she wasn't feeling well during her job interview. Paula was always there to take care of us all. And congratulations to Paula on a well-deserved retirement from Chrissy. And in closing, I'd just like to say Paula has been an incredible role model for me personally. Paula taught me how to do journal entries and how to run payroll way back in the day. And I wouldn't be where I am without all your patience and thorough communication. And to somehow balance an impossible amount of accounting work with an incredible amount of accuracy, with a robust family and social life, and it is so well deserved that you get to dedicate yourself full time to all your fun adventures. And we hope you know that you always have a home here, and you'll come back to visit us in between all your adventures.
You don't have a speech for us, Paula? Some parting words? Okay, I guess you're going to let Kim take the stand then?
Wonderful. I couldn't think of a better place to work, and just all the people that I work with are just amazing. It's bittersweet, but we're getting ready to travel, so we're going to start enjoying it.
Seems the bittersweet is shared. Kim, would you like to come?
Sure. I didn't realize Nikki was putting me on the spot. So what I said about Paula is she is the consummate professional. Her work ethic was a model for all of us in the Administrative Services Department. But while she did that, it was always fun. And we always had fun. And she was so positive and a pleasure to be around all the time. And outside of work, one of the funnest people that I know. And I'm so excited for the two of you. Going off on your traveling adventures. You always managed to do it while you were working. It'll be even better now, I can tell you. So congratulations and thank you for all of your contribution to the town of Truckee. It's so appreciated. We love you lots.
I would just like to get back to some of the pictures where you're all hanging out without masks and having so much fun. Can we just do that again? Okay, we're on to agenda item 5.5. We have Kira Ross and David Jones from Emmanuel Jones and Associates presenting a legislative advocacy information.
Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, Council.
I think that got turned off, yeah.
It did get turned off. Okay. Once again, thank you very much, David Jones, Emmanuel Jones and Associates. Very happy to see the snow on our way here. Happy not to be driving through it, but like to see it up in the mountains. I'll give you a brief look back on the high and low lights from the recently concluded session. Then Kira will give you an overview of the efforts on climate change, wildfire, and all the latest on the housing package. And finally, I'll break out my crystal ball and give you kind of a vision of what may be happening to us in next year in Sacramento. Sunday was the last day for the governor to finish his work dealing with all the legislation that landed on his desk. All in all, it was a pretty light year. The Assembly introduced 1,594 bills, and the Senate did 829, for a total of 2,423 bills. But only 836 made it to the governor's desk. So only about 34% made it to the governor's desk, which was a very small amount considering what they normally do. Governor signed 770 bills, and he vetoed 66, so pretty high signing rate. For Truckee specific, we asked for and received a veto of SB 556, which would have mandated that the town make your street lights and lighting poles available to wireless companies at a very reduced cost. So that was good news on the veto front. Another bill we had a lot of work on was AB 1401, which said anybody within a development within a half a mile of a transit stop could not require off-street parking. We were able to get an amendment to exempt Truckee out of that, so had the bill passed, it didn't. We would have still been able to say you can't build and have people park along the street, especially with snow removal being an issue. So that's good. We anticipate that bill will come back again. The governor and legislative leaders cut a deal to really limit the amount of bills that got to them. So that's why we had such a low volume. And then the recall had a big impact on sidetracking a lot of the more controversial bills. So one of the bills that did pass is AB 361, which allows local agencies to continue to meet remotely if you so need to until January of 2024. So that's good. If you had a wildfire or emergency, you could declare that and continue to meet remotely. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Kira to fill you in.
Welcome, Kira.
Thank you. Good evening. I guess it's evening at this point. I'll start with the $15 billion package on climate resilience that was in this year's budget. Just note that that $15 billion is really over several years. They tend to package multiple packages together. Within that package is about $1.5 billion to prevent and respond to wildfires, including funding for wildfire prevention, new funding for fuel breaks, forest health, and a new home hardening program at Cal OES that will kick off in 2022. It also has about $5.2 billion over 3 years to support immediate drought response and longer-term water resilience, which we think will be very helpful going forward. There's also about $270 million in that package to support a circular economy that recognizes waste as a resource. And funds from that packet or that funding will support the reduction of short-lived climate pollutants, grants to support organic waste infrastructure, including $60 million directly for local jurisdictions for implementation grants for the SB 1383 Organics Waste Recycling Program. For infrastructure investments in that program, as well as funding for edible food recovery and building compost opportunities. On the legislative front, the governor signed several key environmental bills, including a bill to provide an additional year to comply with organic waste regulations. That's been a real issue for local governments up and down the state, and several bills that will regulate the use of plastics, including one that expands the current law on plastic straws that are plastic straws upon request and expands that to other single-use food accessories. So things like plastic forks and knives and all that kind of good stuff. We'll also see an initiative on plastics next fall that is qualified for the ballot, and that is the Plastics Free California Initiative. It requires CalRecycle to adopt regulations that reduce the use of single-use packaging and enacts a 1 cent per item fee on single-use packaging and foodware, with revenue going to the state and local governments. So 30% of the money that comes in from that new initiative, if it is passed by the voters, 30% will go to local governments for composting programs and plastic pollution mitigation. So that's promising. We'll also see renewed action next spring on 2 pending environmental bonds that are moving in the legislature. Both have very significant funding for wildfire, water, extreme heat events, and wildfire protection. The Assembly version right now is about $7 billion, and the Senate version is about $5.5 billion. And typically we don't look at bonds until we get to about the May or June-ish of the year that it would go on the ballot, but we do expect that there will be continued discussion that will happen next spring on those. On the housing front, we again saw a number of housing bills. They don't ever seem to really go away, including 4 major ones I just wanted to touch on tonight that are pretty well known. SB 8 by Senator Skinner extends the Housing Crisis Act of 2019 by 5 years from 2025 to 2030. And the Housing Crisis Act, you may remember, was enacted last year, so it's only 1 year old, in SB 330. And that bill created a new preliminary application for housing projects in California. And once a developer submits a preliminary application, the number of public hearings on the project is limited. The local agency is prohibited from applying new rules or standards to the project, and nearly all project-related fees are frozen in place. And this was really designed, they wanted to give stability to developers. And so the bill that passed just this last month, extends that program by 5 years to 2030. SB 9 by Pro Tem Atkins, which you're probably very well aware of, requires a city or town to ministerially approve either or both a housing development of no more than 2 units, so a duplex, in a single-family residential zone and or a subdivision of a parcel zone for residential use into 2 approximately equal parcels, commonly known as the lot split bill, or as a lot split, and the bill is known as the lot split bill. In addition to the 2 units per lot, a developer could also add an ADU and or a junior ADU to the lot to create a maximum of 4 units per lot. And the last 2 units are provided the town approves an ADU and or a junior ADU. The bill has a number of restrictions for the type of properties that are eligible, including being located in an urbanized area or urban cluster, properties that are within a high fire severity zone, historic properties, and properties that have had a tenant within the last 3 years. Important for this area is that the bill is also silent on HOAs and CIDs. So it does not apply to HOAs or CIDs, which was a big piece. There may be something in the future, but they couldn't, both sides on that bill, the reason for it was that they had opposition from the people who wanted it to apply to HOAs and CIDs, and they had opposition from people who didn't want, and they couldn't quite get there on the bill, and so they went completely silent on the issue, and so that potentially could come in the future. SB 10, which was authored by Senator Wiener, allows a city to pass an ordinance that is not subject to CEQA to upzone any parcel for up to 10 units of residential density if the parcel is located in a transit-rich area or an urban infill site. This is an opt-in for cities and towns that want to upzone parcels, but it is not a requirement in law today or under the law. And finally, one that we just thought was important that all of our towns and cities are aware of is AB 215, which was, for the most part of the year, a bill on adequate progress towards meeting arena goals. And then in August, it was gutted, and it became a bill about enforcement of housing laws in California. The new law increases the enforcement authority of Housing Community Development, Department of Housing Community Development, in relations to violations of state housing law by expanding the scope of the housing law to include a whole bunch of new areas. Mostly these are areas, for instance, the Housing Crisis Act, another law, SB 35, that was passed about streamlining. We think that they already had authority to do this, but this is statutorily giving them the authority. It also allows HCD to hire outside counsel for cases that the State Attorney General declines to represent HCD, but for which HCD would like to continue to pursue. This is new provision and a really pretty big deal that they can go outside now and hire outside counsel. It also creates a new statute of limitations of 3 years for actions related to compliance with the town's or county's housing element. And it adds an additional 30-day public comment period to the first draft revision of a housing element, with an additional 10-day period for the city or in town to consider and incorporate public comment. That last provision about the additional 30 days will actually not apply to your current cycle of RENA, but it would apply to the next cycle. And it's important to, and then, so it's the conversation in Sacramento on housing, and David will talk sort of about what we're continuing to see. But the conversation on housing has really been about both the lack of production and the lack of affordable housing, but also about enforcement and really putting teeth to a lot of these laws. And we're seeing that really happen in bills. We saw it in 8, 9, and 10, and a whole host of other bills about production, and they're closing little loopholes here and there. But 215 was the first time we've really seen a big bill come forward on enforcement, and we're starting to see that as well. We do think that there will be additional bills in 2022. They are already meeting and talking about what else can we do on housing. I think until we see some kind of a balance in terms of the need and the number of units that are built, we'll continue to see ideas up in Sacramento. So it's going to continue to be a hot topic going forward in next year. And with that, I'll jump back.
All right, tag team, I'm it. So as Kira mentioned, housing and homelessness continues to be a crisis, and we'll see another march towards that. Next year is also the Triple Witching Hour, so we have a yet another election year, and we also have redistricting. So because the data from the federal census is delayed due to COVID and other factors, many members will not know exactly where their districts are when they have to file for re-election in March for a June primary, so that will be interesting. So we will see a lot of legislation we anticipate on oil spills, considering the oil spill down in Southern California. As Kira mentioned, drought and wildfire issues will continue to be hot topics, no pun intended, for Sacramento. COVID vaccine mandates are going to continue to be a subject. There was a bill saying all employers were going to have mandatory vaccines for all your employees, regardless of how big you are. So that we think is going to come back. And then I guess the good news is, I always like to leave with good news, is the state is once again experiencing quite a significant surplus. We only have data from the first 2 months of the state's fiscal year, July and August. We're $3.5 billion over what they projected in June in revenues, and it's mainly capital gains. So we anticipate that there'll be another discussion about opportunities, and we'll be working with your staff on budget opportunities on getting projects so we can make sure we do get some of the resources that Kira talked about. So with that, I'd be happy to stop and answer questions.
Thank you so much, David and Kira. Do we have questions from any of the council members? You've got two. Jan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Is the information you just provided also available on a publication or a report from your office?
Absolutely. We could send our notes, and if there are any specific questions on bills, we've got write-ups on almost all of them.
Okay. My only immediate question is when you're talking about money for hardening homes, would that also include energy efficiency improvements that...
You know, it's not entirely clear. This is a brand new program that was just funded in June or July. It's going to be out of OES. I think it's about $500 million. It was like $593 million. Originally, OES had said, oh yeah, we're going forward, we'll have grants that'll go out right away. And then more recently, they've kind of taken a step back. So it's sort of launching in 2022. And so I haven't seen any details about exactly what the money will go towards, but we'll continue to monitor that and see how that develops. So that's something that we could get out to your staff and you can get out to the public, because these would be funds that would go to homeowners to do different projects.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions, Councilmember Romack? Thank you. Councilmember Pallavi.
Yeah, just a quick one. Thank you so much. It's always great to hear from you guys. Appreciate you coming back. I don't know if it's a question for you or maybe for maybe Andy or Danielle. So on SB 9, if I heard you correctly, HOAs are exempt from that, is what you said?
Yes, because the bill is completely silent on HOAs, and there's actually the question came up on the floor of the Senate a couple of times, and the pro tem made it very clear that it's not intended to apply to HOAs at this point. There's also a letter to the Journal that we're trying to get a copy of, which is a letter that she's written. It's a sort of in-house letter that she writes to say this was the intent of the law, and that the intent was not to apply it to HOAs. And that letter is used, typically letters to the Journal are used if a lawsuit ever comes up. So then the court would look back at the intent, and that letter would provide some level of intent. So we'll get that copy to your staff as well, because I know you have a number of HOAs in your...
Yes, that was really going to be my question to our staff is, what kind of ability do we have? Do we have that overarching ability to expand it to HOAs if we so chose, and sort of where do we sit, I guess, in that middle world? And then I know you've given us this stat before, Danielle. I don't know if you still have it off the top of your head. I was trying to find it, but how many of our actual housing units are not in HOAs, which is like, I remember it was really low, but...
Let me tackle that first one first.
Thanks, Andy.
So the state of California has the ability to sort of override the ability of HOAs to prohibit lot splits. We don't have that authority. So until and unless the bill gets amended, there's not much we can do to prohibit that. HOAs will all have to look at their own CC&Rs to see whether their existing CC&Rs would prohibit lot splits. Some of them might, some of them might not. In some cases, it may be ambiguous. And I don't think that we necessarily want to wade into that fight.
Except that I was going to say, I don't want to speak for anybody else up here, but I would say that we would support the state doing that for us so that we don't have to deal with it because we're just going to have consumer, you know how, how it goes.
Our general position, along with every city I've ever worked in, is that we don't enforce CC&Rs.
Right.
So if somebody comes in and wants to do a lot split, we wouldn't necessarily say no based on the fact that it's not permitted under the CC&Rs, but I anticipate that that would lead to a lot of disputes between homeowners and their HOAs.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar scenario to what we had with Tahoe Donner and ADUs. And so it wasn't until we made that a law that we were able to see ADUs developed in Tahoe Donner. As far as areas that don't have active homeowners associations, it's probably less than 300. If you talk about Prosser, Olympic Heights, sort of Armstrong Tract, and then there's a couple other smaller homeowners associations. So it's really not that many compared to our total housing stock that we have.
And so just out of a process perspective, because as I know, I personally had higher hopes for SB 9, but yet looking like it's not going to be very successful for us at the very least, we still cannot, whether it's through general planning or any other type of zoning, there's really no, we need to either be aligned with HOAs or the state needs to be aligned with HOAs or not at this point is sort of the result of all that.
I mean, I would say one of the things that we can do is look to create some incentives through the general plan update process that might be enough to switch some of the HOAs. I mean, if enough of the members of that HOA believe in this and want to see this happen within their neighborhood, then they'll go to their HOA and ask to have that part of their process. So I think that could be an opportunity for us that we haven't explored. One of the things that we're working on is to try and figure out which HOAs do prohibit so that we can create a map and try and figure that out. We haven't done that level of work yet, but our intent is to bring some objective design standards in front of the council probably by February is probably the soonest we can get it done because that is something that the state says that we can regulate.
Thank you for that. And then just before you guys go, I know you guys focus almost all of your efforts for us on state legislation. What kind of role do you don't have any role, I believe, in our federal legislative advocacy, but any words of wisdom or as money starts to flow on some of these ARPA bills, other things like that, do you have any insights into how all of that's starting to work and flow down the pike?
We don't work at the federal level. I used to. I worked at DC for 5 years, so I'm very conversant with the federal process. We do have a lot of clients that we do work with their federal lobbyists, so we do have some conversations there. And I think that there is going to be some opportunities for marrying the federal infrastructure bill with possibly state funding. So we'll continue to look out for those opportunities. But as far as a day-to-day basis, we're thankfully on this coast.
And Council Member Pallavi, just to remind you that we do collaborate with Nevada County and with Paragon, and they're advocating at the federal level for us.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would love to get your notes on all of that as well. And in particular, I know we're all thinking on these lines, but we want to be leveraging our resources with the resources available in Sacramento to improve our community. So thank you so much for coming all the way up here tonight. Thank you. And I'm glad it didn't snow on you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. We are now at 5.6, Town Manager's Report. Jen?
Yes, thank you. A couple of items tonight. I, too, wanted to extend my thanks on behalf of the town for the passage of Measure T, to the committee that worked on that and the community for voting on that. That, as Mr. Diamond expressed, passed with about 80% approval rate. That's $3.7 million annually to fund wildfire protection. So that's a great benefit for the Truckee Fire Protection District to help harden our community. And then there's lots of opportunities to participate in your local government this week and next week. We have a ribbon cutting ceremony on Thursday, October 14th. That's for the Brockway Trail Extension Project, 3:30 p.m. on the corner of South River Street and Brockway, so please join us for that. We also have two planning commissions kind of back to back. We have a planning commission meeting on the 14th at 5 o'clock That's a special meeting, mostly to hear Innovate Gateway. And then we have a Planning Commission meeting on the 19th. That's the regular meeting at 6 o'clock. Single-use food ware reduction working group. We're soliciting applications for anybody in the community that would like to participate in that discussion. It's going to meet once a month for the next 4 to 6 months, starting in November. Be working on policies to help draft the ordinance, implementation plan for whatever comes out of that ordinance, and then outreach to stakeholders. So if you're interested in that, please fill out an application. You can find that information on the town website, and applications are due November 5th. And then lastly, you can join council members Romack and Zabriskie for the coffee chat. That is also Thursday morning, which is a very busy day of activity here at the town. 8:30 a.m. at the Lift House coffee spot, and that is to talk all things trails and transportation. So the council members would like to hear feedback from the community on transit opportunities or what they would like to see in trails. So please join them for that. And that's all my updates tonight.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yes, all those active enthusiasts, come on out. We want your feedback. Thank you, Councilmember Romack and Zabriskie, for doing that. Much appreciated. At this point, I will open it up to public comment. Do we have any public comment on any of the presentation items? Okay, do we have any further council comments or questions? Great, okay. Just under an hour on presentations, not bad. So we have a consent calendar. Staff did pull item 6.8. Are there any other items council would like to pull? Any members of the public wish to pull a consent agenda item? Any other items from staff other than 6.8?
No.
Okay, so quick rundown. 6.1, minutes of the March 9th and September 28th meeting? March 9th? We skipped that one, huh? 6.2, Historic Preservation Advisory Commission, HPAC appointments. 6.3, Third-Party Plan Review Services Consultant Contract Awards. 6.4, documentation of town support for the vision of a new Truckee Library facility in partnership with the Friends of the Truckee Library and Nevada County. Item 6.5, documentation of town support for Truckee Thursdays in partnership with Truckee Downtown Merchants Association. Item 6.6, short-term rental ordinance and fee update. Item 6.7, Old Greenwood and Grays Crossings 2021 roads. And item 6.9, contract award of HF&H Consultants for Solid Waste Cost-Based Rate Review. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar as just read by the mayor.
And I'll second.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, and I would like to just commend staff for their approach to multiple items on that consent calendar in creating efficiency in staff reports and how many agenda items you're bringing to us and how quickly you can turn these things around. I found it very intriguing that you guys were looking for ways to create efficiency in your internal processes, so great work. Okay, so we're on to discussion items. Where are we? On the next page. 7.1, fiscal year 2021-2022 budget amendment to amend C2108 and approval of contract with TBWBH props and measures. Alfred?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm Alfred Knotts, Transit Program Manager. We're before you this evening to come back and honor a commitment we had a few weeks ago here to discuss a contract agreement for TBWBH and also discuss a budget amendment that would also would facilitate that contract execution. A little more background. Again, we did discuss this back in September, the end of September, and the direction was to evaluate Measure R prior to the 2024 expiration. This was passed in 2014. It was a 10-year sales tax measure. This also is included in the work program, so this was something that staff did intend to work on. However, there is additional levels of effort that will be undertaken as part of to meet the 2022 ballot initiative, if that's what council does decide to do down the road. But we'll talk about that in the timeline. So we did talk about different scenarios about when this would be presented to the public for consideration. So 2022 was kind of the initial timeline that was laid out. A little bit aggressive, but we do feel that we can make that timeline and also not sacrifice any type of transparency or public involvement or council involvement as well. So we would execute a contract with TBWBH to assist with the public polling, include a certain level of survey for alternative transportation, and then council members Zabriskie and Romack would be consulted and involved directly with staff and the polling firm and other consultant services under that contract to serve as community liaisons as opposed to forming a broader committee, and that was discussed also in September. And again, honoring what we committed to as a return to you tonight to seek that approval in terms of the contract. The scope that we're seeking to execute with TBWBH is, again, the professional services. There's a kind of a retainer fee, I guess you could say, that is included in Attachment A that describes their whole scope of work and the breakdown of cost. That is a per month contract at $6,500. There's a public opinion survey that would be done with their sub-consultant, which is True North, who's helped on a variety of different measures as well. So this is the same team that is very familiar with our community. They would develop information materials and mailings and develop a final draft and final ballot language. And again, we would come back to you before that and discuss the results of the polling measures and public opinion surveys. But we would request full authorization tonight with the contract execution, and those scopes of services would be included. But we wouldn't obviously embark on some of these endeavors if certain information came back and we didn't feel that it was the right time to proceed with the 2022 election. So the budget action, so there is two items here, again, the contract and then the budget amendment. We would amend CP 2108 from 40 to 80. Again, that is a doubling of the budget, but again, this did not anticipate this level of work that we would embark on right now. Really, I think what was included in the work program really just looked at the survey and type of work that would be required during this fiscal year, not necessarily a lot of the social media outreach, ballot measure language, and so on. So we would, another thing that's listed in there too is that we're adding transportation initiative language in there, maybe not at the same level, and it will not be to the same level. There is a core set of questions that will be asked as specific to Measure R, and then we discussed leveraging this effort to get a little bit additional information on transportation, transit, and alternative transportation, so broader than just transit. By doing that, we would seek additional funds in the amount of approximately $21,833 from Nevada County Transportation Commission. We have had those discussions. We can't tell you today that that funding is in hand or even has been allocated or appropriated to this effort as of right now, but we do feel we've had initial conversations to the level of details about what this would be used for, its eligibility, and it does fall in line with those eligible costs. So we would continue to pursue that. The timeline we did lay out, again, this is aggressive, but we do feel like we can meet this timeline. To meet the 125 days, it needs to be worked backwards from that June date. Again, without compromising any time of public process or transparency. We have laid this out. We've taken into consideration the council meeting dates, holidays, those types of things, other levels of engagement from the public. So we would finalize and conduct this survey in October, November, present those results to council and the public, initiate formal community engagement and outreach in December, ongoing community engagement outreach, again, considering the holidays and kind of how hard it is to keep people engaged during that time and to make sure that we use certain mechanisms and groups to keep them informed. reading of the second and first and second ordinance, and then submit that ballot language to the county clerk in February. And again, this is contingent on an iterative process here. We'll be coming back and making sure that we're moving forward with a full council, well, not full council, but a council endorsement. And I believe that is essentially the rundown of the actions requested tonight and background information. And then I would be happy to answer any questions, or if Dan would like to add anything.
Just one follow-up comment. At the council meeting 2 weeks ago, we had a lot of conversation about transit and the level of information to collect on transit. So we have spoken with the polling consultants about that. And we've also spoken with council members Zabriskie and Romack. The polling consultants' recommendation is that if what we're intending to go to the ballot with is a trails measure, either to re-up it or possibly increase it, that should be the primary focus of our survey efforts. Make sure we get that right and we get the full host of data necessary to support that effort. And then effectively to add some transit-related questions to the end of what would be a trails-focused survey. The other thing they told us to not be surprised by, though, is if the transit-related information is maybe reflective more negatively of public sentiment than is the actual case. So that the data, if you were to ask a person, would you support renewing a trail sales tax, and they say yes, and then you say, oh, and by the way, would you support a new transit sales tax? There's a higher likelihood they would say no, because it's, you just got done talking to them about one tax, now you're talking to them about another, and they said what they've seen in these kinds of surveys before is that you will tend to get a more negative set of data than maybe the actual what's actually reflective of the electorate. So we talked with them about that, and we talked about other options to account for that. There didn't appear to be a lot of great options. So what we can expect back from the work product from the consulting team is one report that's focused on trails, and a second report that's focused on transit that won't have the same level of detail and information as the trails report will have, but that should still be informative to us in making decisions related to transit and alternative transportation going forward. So we just wanted to make sure that the council was aware of that. They said really if we want to get a clean read, which was their term, on transit, the way to do that would be to do a separate poll a few months from now specific to transit that would not be affected by this, gee, now you're talking to me about trails, now you're talking to me about transit. The other way they said it could be done, but we decided we didn't want that, I believe, was they said you could ask about trails, and then you could ask about trails and transit as a combined measure. I think staff felt that concept was discussed at the prior council meeting, that the council did not, from what we were hearing, did not seem interested in a combined trails and transit measure. So we told the consultant team that since we didn't see that kind of a combined measure really in the cards for at least the near term, that they should just focus on a trails only, and then with what they termed the bolt-on survey for the transit at the end of the trails survey. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Dan. Those are really important specifics and details for us to keep in mind as we move forward. And yeah, I think that was our direction, and we're going to see what we get out of all of that. Okay, do we have council questions? Councilmember Zabriskie? None? No? Okay, I don't have any questions either. We just went into a deep dive on this last time, so I am looking for deliberation. Do we have, public comment, right? Anybody would like to speak on this agenda item? Okay, deliberation, or I will take a recommendation.
I move we amend fiscal year 21-22 budget by amending project C2108 from $40,000 to $80,000 and improve the contract with TBWBH props and measures in a form approved by the town attorney in an amount not to exceed $72,750.
I will second that. And can I make a comment after my second?
Yes.
Just a reminder, as the town manager mentioned in her report, that Councilmember Zabriskie and myself will be talking with people at the coffee talk. So again, this is a perfect opportunity before the polling goes out, if anyone has any thoughts on questions they would like to see, to share them with us.
Excellent addition. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Item 7.2, fee schedule update. My notes say Regina. Is that true?
That is true.
All right, come on up, Regina.
Good evening. I just have a presentation to go through for the preparation of the public hearing. This is the fee schedule, inflationary adjustment, and fee updates.
Great.
Item 7.2. Staff routinely looks at updating the fee schedule on an annual basis. A good portion of the fees are increased by an inflationary index. This index that we are using is the CPI for San Francisco and Oakland. The change we look at is from February to February. So for the February 2020 to February 2021, it was an increase of 1.6%. This index is publicly available. It's for review. It's part of the Bureau of Labor Statistics indexes. And again, the February to February index produced a 1.6% increase. As noted in our staff report, the council, the non-inflationary changes that are being proposed primarily reside in the community development planning section of our fees. I've summarized those changes here, and they're in red in attachment B on pages 14 through 16. Staff is proposing to add a deposit for administrative review, for the administrative review fee for processing administrative review applications. This deposit is proposed with flexibility to ask for a deposit amount that aligns with the complexity of the review that's being requested for the project. Staff is proposing a modification to the deposit for a project amendment. This currently is on our fee schedule as a set fee of $4,000. However, a wide variety of application types may be modified through the project amendment, so the proposed change allows for flexibility to ask for a deposit amount that would align with the known cost associated with the underlying land use permit that is being requested for the project. Staff is proposing a deposit for recorded map modifications. This would align with the recorded map modifications land use permit that was approved by council in March of 2020. Staff is proposing a set fee for zoning verifications. This aligns with the new land use permit for zoning verification also approved by council on May of 2021. The SB9 housing applications deposit is being added proactively to prepare for the requirements associated with Senate Bill 9. And so staff is proposing a set deposit fee of $3,000, as these applications are currently expected to be somewhat similar to the process of a lot line adjustment. Staff is proposing a set fee of $1,000 to be applied for zoning clearance. This is an increase from the current set fee of $750, and so this would more accurately reflect the current costs of processing these applications. Lastly, for all other deposits, staff is proposing to increase those amounts when the cumulative CPI adjustment reaches an increase of $250. This would help keep deposits up with the overall increases of cost of services, which reduces additional administrative costs and project delays that it can occur. And just as a reminder, all excess funds on deposits are refunded to the customer. If these fees were approved, the new fees would become effective January 1st of 2022. and I'll be happy to answer any questions that council may have at this time.
Thank you so much, Regina. I'm kind of getting used to these now. What questions do we have? Anything on this end? Councilmember Romack or Zabriskie? Councilmember, oh, you guys are all so easy tonight. No, I don't have any questions either, Regina. Do we have any public comment on this agenda item? No, seeing none. Back to deliberation or a motion.
My turn? Yeah. I will move that we adopt Resolution 2021-55.
Second.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you.
7.3, acceptance of the quarterly financial report and quarter ending September 30th, 2021. Nikki's back.
This one might be a lot less exciting.
I don't know. I found the report pretty exciting. It's at least not bad news.
Yeah. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
So I'm here to present the financial update for the quarter ending September 30th, 2021. And the purpose of this report is to increase transparency. Transparency is one of the town's overriding values, and we're always looking for ways to ensure that we are being transparent and increase transparency for our constituents. We're ultimately accountable to our residents as to the use of our revenues, and our goal is to spend efficiently and effectively to provide high quality services to our constituents. And by increasing transparency, we're increasing our accountability to those efforts. We also want to be consistently monitoring our revenues and expenditures and responding to unanticipated events and preparing for emerging trends that we might be seeing in the economic markets. So our high-level policies are that we budget conservatively, meaning our expense budgets are adequate to meet all necessary and probable obligations. And so that kind of means that we budget our expenses on the high side, and we budget our revenue levels at probable collection levels, so that sometimes they may seem like they're on the low side, but we want to make sure that we're not being overly optimistic in what we think is going to happen during the year. So when revenue collections are over budget or expense amounts are under budget, that increases our general fund balance, and that money is available for council priorities. I'm going to briefly touch on some items from a U.S. economic outlook standpoint. The Federal Open Market Committee, their monetary policy remained unchanged at their September meeting, so they're currently maintaining their $80 billion repurchase of Treasury bills monthly. That's what's helping to maintain low interest rates. And tapering is expected to be announced at the November meeting. The tapering would begin in December and would last through mid-2022, so that could slightly increase the mortgage rates that we're seeing and the rates of borrowing. The U.S. Department of Labor has been tracking unemployment, and unemployment rates continued to decline between July and August. Slight decrease from 5.4% to 5.2%, so that's a good trend. And there are, in addition to these decreases in unemployment, they've also seen modest increases in average hourly earnings year over year. So last year it was a 4.1% increase, and this year it's up to a 4.3% increase. So that's a nice trend for our employees as well. So we'll start by looking at how our revenues are doing. Property tax is our largest source of general fund revenue, and that's levied by the Nevada County Assessor. The town receives 15 cents of every $1 of property tax collected. For every $30 million of assessed value, the town receives $45,000. So that's a lot of property value out there for us to get our $12 to $13 million worth of property tax. It can increase the amount that the assessed value of properties can increase up to 2% annually or the lesser of the California CPI, except for if a property is sold, then it's revalued at market value. So just to give you a refresher on how property taxes is collected and assessed, and we don't get our first remittance of property tax till January, so we don't have any collections to analyze at this point. Our budget is based on the Nevada County Auditor Controller, not the assessor, the Auditor Controller's spring estimate. We have received the assessment letter from the assessor, and it indicates that assessed value increased by just over 6%. We budgeted a 6% increase, so we're feeling very confident in our revenue budget for the year. Sales tax is our second largest source of general fund revenue, and it accounts for approximately 16% of general fund revenues. It's levied on the sales of taxable goods sold within the incorporated city limits of the town of Truckee, and our current rate in Truckee is 8.25%. That includes the base sales tax rate plus our use taxes, Measure V, Measure R, and the Nevada County Library tax. Our budget for fiscal year 21-22 is $5.36 million. This would mean that approximately $534 million worth of taxable goods have to be sold during the year for us to meet that collection level. So here's just a nice graphic to show you. So out of every $100 worth of sales tax collected, the town general fund gets $12, $6 for Measure V, and $3 for Measure R. So some analysis of what's happening. To date, we've only received, it's kind of early in the year, so this is going to be a really boring one, but we might get really spicy in the next couple of quarters, so something to look forward to. To date, we've only received the July prepayment, and this the prepayment is just the state's projection of what they think 1/3 of the month's collections or the quarter's collections are going to be. So that will be trued up once they get the actual quarterly filings. So they're starting to get those quarterly filings, and we'll get that payment in November. Their projection prepayment amount was 20% higher than last July's payment, so that's positive. We don't know the impact of the wildfire events that we had that kind of drove away tourism, so we'll monitor that and we'll report back when we have better economic data. Transient occupancy tax, our third largest revenue source for the general fund, and accounts for approximately 13% of general fund revenues. It's levied on short-term rentals of 30 consecutive nights or less. This one's so big right now, you probably are pretty familiar about how it's collected, and so I won't go too much detail there, but the filing deadline for quarter ending September 30th is until November 1st. We don't have results yet. And we also don't know the impacts that the wildfire event have, so we don't want to make any assumptions. We're going to wait and see kind of what the collections say. The results, we do have some results from the quarter ending June 30th, but they are unaudited and subject to slight adjustments and changes as we work through our year-end book closings. And our preliminary results show that collections were at about $1 million. The next highest year for that quarter was at $670,000. So that's a very significant increase. I think we all kind of felt that pressure around town anecdotally. So we're analyzing that number to make sure it's accurate, because anytime things look really rosy, accountants are like, this can't be right. So we're just verifying that number and trying to figure out like kind of what drivers we think may have helped get us to that number. So our budget for fiscal year 2021 was $3.4 million. We're looking at almost $5 million worth of collections, and that surplus will roll into the general fund for use towards council priorities during our next budgeting season. Franchise fees, they represent around 3% of general fund revenues. They're collected by the town for privileges of operating a private utility service within the town limits, so not the PUD. Currently received for electricity, garbage, cable TV, and natural gas. We currently have the natural gas, the Southwest Gas franchise agreement is currently up for renegotiation, but at the March 2021 meeting, council approved a 1-year extension to give staff and Southwest Gas more time. So we will keep you guys updated as those items progress. I think Andy's working on that one. And the cable TV agreements are currently through the state, so we don't have any control over those, just something to keep in mind. The first remittances are not due until October, November, therefore hard to make any recommendations on this one either. Charges for services. Some of our biggest categories of charges for services for our general fund include engineering plan check fees, plannings, plan processing fees, and public works snow removal charges to the counties and to our special district, our parking district. And it's assessed based on a recovery formula, which reflects the approximate cost to deliver those services. Staff expected that the cyber event that we endured would have an impact on some of our collections of those sources, but we found that our staff was pretty ingenuitive, and despite many challenges, we're able to continue to provide services to our constituents, maybe at modified but still significant levels. And most of our sources are pretty much in line with prior years' collections at this time of year, so that's good news. And quarter ending September 30th, 2021 results are slightly higher than the prior year of same quarter, and some of that is due to the addition of short-term rental registration fees, which we didn't have that category last year because the program hadn't started yet. So overall, that's looking solid as well. We wanted to mention some good news. The town gets about $100,000 per year of COPS funding, so it's community-oriented policing services. It's through the U.S. Department of Justice, and it comes through the state and then to the county and then back to us. And there's a growth special account, and we received an additional $171,000 from this growth account. It's limited for use on just police service and subject to special requirements. And Randy's team will be working on plans of how to spend that money to enhance our policing services. We wanted to touch on Measure K, which is our new Transient Occupancy Tax. And that was the November 3rd, on November 3rd, Truckee voters passed that amendment to the TOT ordinance to assess 2% for housing open space preservation and wildfire preparedness at council's discretion. The Housing Division is going to bring a housing money prioritization to council at a future meeting, so we can kind of prioritize how council wants us to think about spending this money. So for the first 2 quarters that this Measure K has been active, that was quarter ending March 31st, 2021 and quarter ending June 30th, 2021. We haven't received collections for the quarter ending 9/30/2021 yet, so that's on November 1st. We just want to reiterate that these are unaudited and subject to slight tweaks, but we had a budget of $325,000. That was our initial expectation of collections, and we are at $481,000. So that's very positive. And again, this one could be impacted by the impacts of the wildfire event, so we're not recommending any changes for our fiscal year 21-22 budget.
You did have your dates wrong then on that slide, right? It's not 2021, it's 21-22 is what you were trying to show us? On the red and the purple, the first 2 graphs. You just said it correctly, I think, right?
So that was for last year. So yes, it was 2021. There's too many
What
dates.
did we collect so far? What have the first 2 quarter collections been?
Yeah, so the bar in red is the budget that we anticipated receiving for fiscal year 2021. And then the purple, the purple one right next to the red is the unaudited actuals for fiscal year 2021. So we have received about $481,000 in the first 2 quarters that measure was active.
Oh, I see, because those are going to last year's budget.
Correct.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Now
So,
I'm following.
yeah. So we just we know that it looks like a huge jump between fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 21-22. But that's because last year was just for a half year of collections, and now we're in our first full year of Measure K being active. So yeah, we'll keep you guys apprised of how that one turns out. we wanted to look at our expenses as well. So one of our major categories of expenses is salaries and benefits, and includes salaries and benefits for full-time employees, elected officials such as yourself, part-time and temporary overtime benefits, pension, and healthcare. At this point in the year, we typically see that expenses are about 20% of budgeted actuals, and that's because the timing of different expenses, like our healthcare rates don't go up until January, so we don't want to be exactly a quarter of the way through our budget, because, you know, the second half of the year, the expenses may be greater than the first half of the year. So that's what we really want to see, is about 20% or less of our budgeted expenses. And we're currently at around 20% as of quarter ending September 30th, 2021. We have sent some budget changes, but staff believes there's adequate savings to encompass the changes at this point. And I think that's that one. And then our other major category of expenses is supplies, materials, and services. You would assume that this one would trend about 25% at the end of the first quarter too, but some of our lump sum payments kind of vary in their timing, so we don't spend exactly in an exact pattern, so it kind of fluctuates. And right now we're at about 20% of our budgeted expenses for the year as of quarter ending September 30th, 2021, and that's in line with prior year's trends. I did want to point out, I know it looks like the budget for 21-22 looks a lot higher than our actuals from prior year. This is because, again, we do budget on the conservative side because we want to make sure that we have enough for our probable and expected expenses. And there's some one-time spending on some projects that don't have a prior year comparable, so it makes that budget amount look higher. And then also there are some divisions that we're ramping up in the general fund, including housing, sustainability, and short-term rentals, that are kind of a part of that increase as well. So I know it looks big, but there are reasons that are behind that are in line with council priorities. Additionally, prior years' actuals encompass savings, because one of our tenets here is that we don't budget with a use it or lose it mentality. So that helps encourage our division managers and department heads to only spend what they need rather than spending because they're worried that they're going to have a budget reduction in future years. And those savings roll into our general fund again and are available for council priorities and capital projects. We wanted to give you a short update on what's happening with the cyber event. We are going to be sending out noticing to anyone who had a potential data exfiltration. We'll be sending that to all of our employees with specifics on what data was potentially infiltrated, instructions on how to sign up for credit monitoring. There were a few outside entities or people regarding that had items that were potentially exfiltrated. It was mostly related to W-9s that we had on file for them, and it was around 30 individuals or companies. And we're also keeping an eye on legislation that has been coming out, and a big one that we are worried about is SB 278, which is regarding CalPERS. It shifts the consequence for reporting later disallowed compensation away from the employee and to the employer. So previously, if an item of compensation was later disallowed by CalPERS, then the employee would have to reimburse CalPERS for the overpaid retirement amounts that they received, which, yes, that's that's for somebody on a retirement income, that can be a very significant cost and impact onto their life. This is also scary on the employer side, because now we're required to repay CalPERS for the full amount of any overpayments made to the retiree, and a 20% penalty, which is calculated as the present value of the full future benefits that the retiree is expected to receive. So that's a very significant amount. There's still a lot of outstanding issues with this bill that will have to probably be litigated primarily what happens if CalPERS told us that it was an allowed item of compensation and then later disallows it, because that has actually happened to us on numerous occasions. And judges sometimes rule on compensation items and later change the the classification of it. So how does that, are we going to be subject to a penalty amount when a judge changes the ruling of how that item of compensation is going to be determined by CalPERS? And also some items such as what if the item was not agreed to as a pensional compensation item in a collective bargaining agreement? There's a lot of intricacies that are still needed to be litigated that aren't detailed in the bill. So we'll keep council apprised at this and look for more assistance from our partners in legislation. So this is our first quarterly report. Previously, we did this as a brief presentation, and we plan to continue to expand this report and check in on additional funds of interest with greater analysis of expense categories and hopefully some key economic and analytics to watch for emerging economic trends. That was a tongue twister. So we're not recommending any adjustments at this time. We are very early in the year, and we have had some events that could impact our revenues and expense sources. So we kind of want to wait for those to play out a little bit before we make any change recommendations. So with that, if there's any questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, here's the recommendation.
Thank you so much for that overview. I think it's really important for us all to be reminded of all of these specifics and challenges that we face in trying to make sure that we end the year at the right spot, right? Do we have any council questions on this side?
Yep.
Councilor Zabriskie?
Yeah. Nikki, what I got from the report was it's very limited information in terms of reporting just because of the natural lag that occurs. But based on the information we have, both revenues and expenditures are what we expected. They're in line with what was budgeted.
Trending with prior years.
Trending with prior years, okay. And then we have this 20%, projected 20% increase in revenues, but realizing future returns may cause that optimism to back off in light of the fire situation. All of that said, I wanted to make sure this is essentially looking at cash in and cash out, right? It's not looking at obligations incurred, correct? Because we've incurred some additional obligations and made some budget adjustments. They're just not showing up yet here, correct?
We believe at this time that the additional obligations that will have enough savings to cover those obligations at this point. So we're going to continue to monitor that. It's so hard to tell because we still have, 80% of our budget and 9 months of the year to really see the full impacts. But at this point, we feel comfortable with the amount of budget that we have in place that it'll be sufficient to cover those additional expenses.
Okay. So
and just to clarify on the sales tax,
yes.
So the state's projection of what they gave us was 20% higher, but that amount is probably encompassed in our budget amount for the year. So it's kind of like a little bit of a nuance, but we're not expecting that we're going to get 20% higher sales tax revenues than we budgeted. It's just that the prepayment for July was 20% higher than the prepayment for July last year.
Okay. It's my impression that right now it looks like the additional expense that wasn't anticipated due to this cyber incident is going to be about $750,000. Because of the insurance, it's down around $750,000 or $800,000, somewhere in that number. Should we expect to see that as in the expenses, the expenditures for the next quarter?
So we budgeted that one not directly from the general fund, but through our capital improvement plan. And we projected that we would fund that from general fund balance. So just what we have stored. for our operating expenses, we try and match those to our operating revenue. So like we know this, we have ongoing money coming in and we have these ongoing expenses, and we kind of want those to match up so that we're not creating a deficit each year, like spending more than we have in revenue. And the difference between our revenues and our expenditures is what we call the operating surplus, and that feeds into our general fund balance. So that fund balance is kind of available. And we also have a contingency for just these types of things that we could talk about if we want to use some of that contingency to fund this cybersecurity event or not. But we're not using any ongoing revenues for the cyber event. We're using past savings, essentially.
Right. So we might very well in the next quarter see expenditures which are above what we incurred in prior years or expended in prior years.
We wouldn't see that in the cyber event expenditures wouldn't come through in our supplies and services because we didn't want it to impact our analysis of our ongoing supplies and services. So we moved that into a CIP project, which I didn't include an analysis of any of our CIP projects, and those aren't included in the supplies and services amounts that I showed you.
I think Councilmember Zabriskie and the rest of the council, when we come back with the mid-year update, we can provide more of analysis of the budget adjustments we've done and where they're funded from, and that might help get to, I think Nikki mentioned expanding this in the future, so.
Yeah, that's what concerns me is what are we looking at down on the road in terms of the increase in the budget? What are you had a slide showing one-time spending. What were the one-time spending items, the larger ones?
Are you talking about this one?
Yes.
So the clerk's department has, I don't know, I can't list them off the top of my head, but different departments have different priorities going that maybe there's not a corresponding one-time expense from the prior year. So one example of that is the clerk's department is switching to an agenda management software. So they have an amount budgeted in their supplies and services for the year that they don't have a corresponding expense in the prior year, but it's just the one-time expense budgeted for fiscal year 21-22. That is slightly inflating their budget for this year, but we know on an ongoing, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have a slightly inflated one ongoing.
Okay, thank you, Nikki.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Just a quick comment from those of us on the ground collecting sales tax. I think you could expect about a 20% of normal collection for the month of August. There was probably a big 4-week session there where sales were well down considerably across the board. And I also think we should be considering a sales tax reduction. I think we're going to be in trouble in Q4 as well, based on all of the shipping backups and merchandise that is not going to be on store shelves in a way that it normally is. And I think that's going to affect our sales tax there too. So while we might have had a really good July, I think our next 2 quarters are going to be a bit painful until it sort of starts to even out again, just from a revenue projection. But that's really good news on TOT. We just have to figure out how to manage all that a little better. So all good. Thank you for that.
Okay, do we have any public comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council. And you don't need a vote or anything, we're just receiving this. And do we have any deliberation, any other comments from council members?
I just want to say thank you. I really appreciated reading through this and your presentation, and I think having these quarterly reports are very useful so we can keep track of where we are. So thank you.
Yeah. Likewise, I agree with Lindsay, and thank you to the town manager. That was what I was interested in terms of getting an idea and the extent to which the budget has changed, including that in part of the quarterly report. So thank you.
With our cyber event, we're having a little bit of trouble producing reports as timely as we used to before. So I had to triage and decide what was most important.
Good point. Yeah, understand.
Yeah, we understand, and well done. Anything else? No. Okay, thank you so much, Nikki. Why don't we take a quick break so we can have fresh minds ready for item 7.2, our vehicle miles traveled. So 10 minutes. for your patience. Agenda item 7.4, Vehicles Mild Travel, VMT, California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, Thresholds Update. And we've got both Becky Bucar and Dan Wilkins up there for this one.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So yes, we're talking about our VMT thresholds tonight. Just a little background on VMT thresholds. SB 743 was passed in 2013, and basically what it said was, for purposes of CEQA transportation analyses, we no longer would be using level of service to evaluate impacts. Instead, we'd be using VMT, and we're required to use VMT. So our general plan still has level of service standards, and level of service is a way for us to evaluate basically the operations of intersections and roadways. It's based on delay. So an intersection where there's a lot of delay is a level service F. An intersection that has very little delay, you just kind of cruise through, is a level service A. So we still use that metric, but for CEQA purposes, now we are required to use VMT. And so that was, it was required to be adopted by agencies in June of 2020. And so we adopted that back in June of 2020, last year. And it has the goals of really achieving greenhouse gas emission goals of the state, promoting active transportation, and promoting infill development. So just a little bit, what is VMT? So, let's say in a typical day, you drive 3 miles from your house to the office, that's 3 VMT. And then you might drive a mile from the office to the store. That's on your way home. That's 1 VMT because it's 1 mile trip and it's 1 trip and it's 1 mile. And then your drive home is 2 miles, so that's 1 trip, 2 miles, that's 2 VMT. So over the course of the day, you generated 6 VMT. So if you have 2 vehicles that drive 5 miles each, that's 10 VMT. Or if you have 5 vehicle trips that are 2 miles each, that's 10 VMT. So the way you reduce VMT is either reduce the amount of trips or reduce the amount of miles or the distance that the trips are made over. So SB 743 required agencies to adopt the thresholds in 2020. So what we did in 2020 is we prepared some draft thresholds. We circulated them for 30 days, and they were adopted on June 23rd through Resolution 2020-21. Some of the goals that we had when we came up with those thresholds in 2020 was to make sure that they were defensible. They can't defensible in case there was, in the CEQA, that they're simple and easy to apply, and that they would limit unnecessary analysis. So when we developed the thresholds in 2020, we had a number of resources. The first being the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. They developed a technical guidance for agencies to help them determine what their VMT thresholds would be, and also develop screening criteria for projects that could be presumed to have less than significant impacts and wouldn't require VMT analysis. Then Nevada County Transportation Commission hired Fair and Peers to do a study to help the jurisdictions in Nevada County develop some thresholds that were more specific to Nevada County. So that would be Grass Valley, Nevada County, Nevada City, and the town of Truckee. And then we took that even further and hired LSC to come up with some very Truckee-specific thresholds and screening criteria. And then we also talked to Placer County back in 2020 to see what they were up to. The thing about 2020 was we were all sort of trying to get our thresholds together around the same time. So we were there weren't like a lot of adopted thresholds at that time to refer to. We were all sort of working on it at the same time. But again, the thresholds were adopted on June 23rd, and then at that time, Council directed staff to return with an update in 6 to 12 months. So we're a little late, apologies, but here we are. So what are the existing thresholds? Really, there's two main parts to it. There's a list of types of projects that are not required to do a VMT analysis because by their very nature, they're presumed to not have a significant impact on VMT. And then there's another set that actually sets the threshold. So here on this slide, these are the types of projects that are considered that don't require VMT analysis per our adopted thresholds. The first is new affordable units or income restricted units. The second is new residential development, which is located within a half mile of the Donner Pass Road, Brockway Road, and Truckee Way corridors. And the thought is depicted in Figure A, which is part of the thresholds, which is this area right here. The thought with that is that the residential in these corridors have access to transit. They are close to services, and in general, the analysis that LSC did indicated they have a trip or VMT generation per unit or trip length that's less than the rest of the town, or the townwide average. The third type of project would be local serving commercial development, less than 10,000 square feet of floor area. I will note that when we came to council in 2020, we actually had originally proposed a 50,000 square foot threshold, and that was reduced. Basically, this works in a way to determine if it's local. It's got to have like 80% of the customers or 80% of the employees have to be within in the region. Another type of projects are transit or active transportation improvements, so a new transit shelter or bike paths. And then lastly, the transportation projects that are consistent with OPR recommendations. There's a document that it references, and that's really includes a lot of traffic improvements or transportation improvements. So roundabouts, traffic calming devices, roadside safety devices. Then the actual thresholds of significance is that was the other part of that, the thresholds or the document. And so any project that meets one of the following criteria is considered to have a significant impact. So if it's inconsistent with the Truckee General Plan land use forecast such that the project results in a net increase in VMT from what would have been generated from the Truckee General Plan land use forecast. So let's see, when the general plan was developed, there was an area that assumed a project had, there was a land use that was assumed and the project generates 100 VMT. Well, if a project comes in that generates a significantly more than that, that would be considered a significant impact. And then also any project that's daily VMT per unit of development is greater than 85% of the townwide average for that use type. So let's say you had an office building that had a VMT generation of 10 per square feet of floor area, or 1,000 square feet of floor area. And the townwide average was 8 VMT. So that would actually be a significant impact because it's the average per floor area generation of VMT is above the townwide average, and we want to see a reduction, a 15% reduction or 85% of the average. So for tonight, what we've done is looked at a few different things to sort of update the thresholds, and we've come up with some, I would say they're pretty minor amendments, but what we've done is we've looked at the past year of implementation and the thresholds and seen what kind of projects are screened out and which ones haven't. And then we've also reviewed other jurisdictions' thresholds to see what they ended up adopting. So the project review, there were 2 projects that were screened out. No VMT analysis was required. That was the Estates Meadow Housing Development. It was a 30-unit affordable housing project. It's affordable housing, so it screens out. It's also within that exemption zone, that corridor where I showed the figure of, so it also, even if it wasn't affordable, it would have screened out. And then Crestwood Construction, it was less than 10,000 square feet and determined to be local serving. And then the projects that weren't screened out, Rocker Memorial Skate Park, we were looking at that. It was greater than 10,000 square feet, the facility, and it wouldn't have screened out. It doesn't screen out under our current thresholds. And then the Golden Valley Charter School, which is an expansion of the school on Union Mills Road, which is, I think it's 240 students, but it might be, it's around that amount. And that does not screen out because it's not part of one of the land uses that would meet the screening criteria. We also had in the staff report, we sort of went through a couple projects that have already undergone CEQA review, weren't actually subject to the new thresholds, but it was worth discussing just to kind of give you some context. So the Coldstream Affordable Housing Project that was was finished, that would have screened out because it's affordable housing. The Artist Loss would have screened out because it's affordable housing. a no VMT analysis would be required for the grocery outlet, not because it was under the 10,000 square foot threshold, but because it qualified for another exemption under CEQA, which would mean that the VMT analysis was not required. An additional transportation analysis wouldn't be required. So there are projects that will qualify under various other CEQA exemptions, and in those cases, they don't require the additional VMT analysis. Other projects that would have required a VMT analysis is Soaring Ranch Phase 1, Raley's. I think that project was over 50,000 between all the 50,000 square feet with all the different commercial buildings. Soaring Ranch Phase 2, if it was just residential, it would have screened out because it's in that exemption zone for residential, but it had commercial and office involved, so it would not screen out. Village at Grays, same thing. It's in the housing exemption zone, but it has a commercial or non-residential component. And then High Altitude Fitness, which was well above the 10,000 square feet. It would not have zoned out.
And Becky, for clarification, these projects on the last two slides are all projects that received environmental clearance prior to 2020. So they didn't actually go through the filtering process because they had been reviewed prior to these going into effect. It's really just for purposes of comparison as to what, had these policies been in place earlier, the types of projects that would have gone through and the ones that would not have.
Right. Yeah, we just haven't had that many projects come through, so this just provides you a little more examples. So we also looked at what other jurisdictions were doing. We looked at Grass Valley, Nevada County, Placer County, TRPA. A lot of that detail is in the staff report as an attachment. I would say that what we're proposing tonight and what our current thresholds are probably most in line with what Placer County's done. And Tower Regional Planning Agencies, actually, they worked closely together, so theirs are similar as well in a lot of respects. So what we're recommending tonight are a few things. First, we wanted to more broadly define, right now our thresholds refer to commercial development, and we wanted to more broadly define that to be non-residential development. So if it's local serving, non-residential development under 10,000 square feet, then it would not be required VMT analysis. Before, we were referring to commercial, and that's a little, if you got an industrial, that may not be considered commercial. So we want to clarify that. And then the other thing that we wanted to do, and we actually got this idea from Placer County, was to specifically list land uses that would automatically be considered local serving. And the reason for this is it can be a little difficult or it can create additional analysis requirements to sort of figure out what percentage of the customers are coming from where when you have a restaurant or some of these services, a library, you can assume that most of those uses have local customers, and so they're local serving. So this list applies to projects that are under 10,000 square feet, but they would automatically, if they were on this list, be considered local serving. And I actually just realized I have a typo on my slide here, and this was a typo that was also in my staff report, so my apologies. We actually did not include public schools or community college in our proposed thresholds. That was something that Placer County had in there, and I thought it should not be in there, so my apologies. So another thing that we considered but did not include in the VMT in the screening criteria or projects that would not require VMT analysis is local housing. We actually originally had that as a recommendation back in 2020. Council elected not to include it, mostly because there are questions about how do you clearly define local housing. So is it deed restricted, or what's the amount of time that it needs to be maintained as local housing? How do you monitor the locals housing? How do you make sure that it stays local? if an employee doesn't necessarily have a job in the area, but they're looking to get a job, are they allowed to apply and live in this housing? There's just there's still some questions about that, and not much those questions that we had in 2020 still remain today, a lot of them, and so we had not recommended including it, but that's something that the council might want to discuss tonight. So potential items for council consideration. So are the screening criteria still appropriate? What we're recommending, is it appropriate? There again, you could talk about the local serving non-residential. Would it be appropriate to include that in the VMT screening criteria? I'm sorry. Are the local serving non-residential land uses appropriate? And then should we include local housing in the screening criteria? And I will just say that the study that LSC did talk about the fact that any local or any housing that you put that's serving a house that's built in Truckee will allow somebody that works in Truckee to live in Truckee. And so they don't have to drive to Reno or places outside Truckee, so it should reduce VMT. So just a summary of our public comment that we have received as of 2 p.m. today. I think we received one other one that was from Sarah Green, which I believe she was questioning some of the screening criteria. But as of 2 p.m. today, we had the Contractors Association has recommended that we include workforce housing or locals housing in the screening criteria. We also had a comment to exempt schools from the VMT analysis due to the benefits that schools provide to the community. And then another comment to that their criteria does not meet the intent of CEQA. And it didn't elaborate, so I'm not sure how to respond to that one, but there was also concerns with the impacts associated with short-term rental market. So I think what that's getting at is if you exempt all the residential in that screening, that exemption zone, potentially you'll be exempting houses that become short-term rentals. And I will also I probably should address all of these. So the issue about the VMT analysis of schools, it was staff's opinion that when we looked at schools and we considered it, but one of our concerns was, although, schools obviously are providing benefit to the community, we have concerns with schools do generate a lot of traffic and they generate a lot of trips. And particularly schools that are not located within kind of like the central part of Truckee when they require trips to be long, or schools that don't have busing associated. So to provide an automatic exemption from the VMT analysis, we didn't think was appropriate because we weren't sure that we could make the findings that it wouldn't have a VMT impact. And then again, going back to my point about the locals housing, I think we could probably make the determination that the local housing, if the council wanted to go that direction, that local housing does have a beneficial impact to VMT. It's more of like, how do you define it is more of the question and the concern. So it's more of the process and how do you define local housing in an easy way for us to sort of implement on the staff level without doing a lot of work upfront defining what that local housing is. So that was a lot. Our recommendation tonight is to adopt Resolution 2021-50 to adopt the updated CEQA Vmt thresholds as outlined in the staff report. And that concludes my presentation. Of course, we're happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah.
Thank you. So did you want to comment too, Dan?
Just one follow-up on Becky's comments related to screening criteria and the kind of the filter that we're looking at it through. So it's not so much, is this a good land use, a bad land use, is it beneficial to the community? Really, the filter we're looking at it through is this a land use in a location that we can make a reasonable determination that it will not have a significant impact on VMT as defined by our policy. And if we can make that determination comfortably, then the rationale for the screening criteria is to not overly burden development projects that we can believe that will not have a high impact or a significant impact to VMT with unnecessary analysis. So just because a project isn't screened out or a land use isn't screened out doesn't mean it can't be approved. It just means that it would have to perform analysis through the CEQA review process to prove that it doesn't have a significant impact. Or if it does have a significant impact, then the project would need to identify mitigations to that. So a school that might have a significant impact, if it adds a transportation service for students to and from that school, that might mitigate that significant impact as an example. So I just wanted to provide that additional context.
Thank you very much for that additional context. And before I go to other council questions, just staying on that theme of mitigation. So one of the ones that was not screened out was the Rocker Memorial Skate Park. And I found that really, really interesting. Was there, is there a specific mitigation measure that they could implement? I wasn't sure because there's no building. So how does that work?
So the way it would work with the project is because the project wasn't automatically screened out, then there would need to be VMT analysis done as a part of the project review. If the VMT analysis were to determine that the VMT of that project was 85% or less of the VMT of other recreational facilities in the town, then there would be no mitigation needed. If that project analysis identified VMT to be higher than 85% of similar recreational uses, then there would need to be an evaluation of mitigation alternatives. And in general, there isn't it would be a project by project review. So it could be constructing non-motorized transportation facilities, sidewalk facilities. It could be providing some funding towards transit programs. It could be implementing transportation demand management programs in another portion of a project proponent's operation. So for instance, if the rec district were the operator of that facility, maybe the rec district could do something at the rec center
to offset.
That could offset, a significant impact over here being offset through some other program in its wheelhouse. So those would be the types of options I think that would be looked at.
And my understanding is that those mitigation measures are not specifically defined. It's up to the developer to come up with those ideas and staff reviews them.
Yes, ultimately it would be the project proponent's responsibility as staff, if we have ideas as to ways that things the developer might look at, we would certainly offer those to them, but ultimately it would be their decision as to what proposal they wanted to make.
Okay, and then one last question on that. If it's a brand new, I understand this applies to anything brand new, but if it's an expansion of a existing facility or project, if it hasn't gone through CEQA, it still has to be evaluated.
Assuming the expansion is subject to CEQA review.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Other town council, you want to jump in?
Sure. Thank you. Fond memories of this the last time we dealt with it, I'm pretty sure. So an 11,000 square foot grocery store would be subject to a VMT analysis.
Correct.
Unless it was, so grocery outlet was not subject to CEQA review because it qualified for an infill development exception. So an 11,000 square foot grocery store that required CEQA analysis would also require VMT analysis. There is a scenario where you could have an 11,000 square foot grocery store that, for instance, in the rail yard, it's already been reviewed from a CEQA standpoint.
And it's infill development.
And it would
Well,
probably
if something's already
qualify.
had a CEQA review, then that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, only projects that have not yet
This is
undergone
news.
CEQA review.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
And under number 2, the land use types that you've identified are regardless of their placement in the community. So if a Elks Club, as you gave us that nice example, I'll just continue with that since I don't think we have an Elks Club in Truckee. If an Elks Club was proposing whether it's 5,000, it doesn't matter the size, I guess, under 10,000 out on Union Mills Road or somewhere outside that Donner Pass Road corridor, they would be exempt from a VMT analysis, regardless of their use pattern.
That's correct. The non-residential doesn't have a zone. It's just anywhere.
It's just anywhere.
With the idea that, some of that comes from the idea that if you have some like commercial out in Tawadona or Glenshire, that could potentially have some trip reduction benefits.
Yeah, I'm really just trying to get to sort of like a level playing field, really, and understand, it's just like a level playing field, really, right? Like, we're going to name all these uses. Some are going to make it, some aren't going to make it. Are we ever going to see a bank way up north on Hobart Mills Road? No. But I'm just trying to sort of put my head around what you're asking us, because these are all going to be new exemptions, right? These are part of everything you're showing us. You got rid of school, thank you, because you've been confusing me twice now on that one. So everything on this list is part of the amendment that we are approving tonight.
Yes, the current policy, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm misspeaking, Becky, is that local serving uses can be exempt. So our current policy identifies local serving land uses as being exempt. What this is attempting to do is put together a list of local serving land uses, so it's not a project by project consideration.
Because if I was going to build a retail store of 8,000 square feet, I'm going to tell you 100% of my customers are local, right? And we're going to have a debate about that at some point. And
a conversation,
yes.
And it doesn't have to be on this list to be considered local serving. We're just going to need an extra analysis.
Precisely. No, I totally get it. And I'm just trying to articulate that, I think, as I'm working through this. So, but these are the amendments of defining local serving at this point. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's very clear.
And I thank you for that line of questioning, because my understanding is these are the types of services we're trying to make sure people don't have to drive, say, to Reno to do. So we want them in Truckee, and we want them serving Truckee residents, right? That's what we're
we're trying to reduce the cost of like public infrastructure. I mean, the library that we're envisioning is going to be a world-class, world-renowned library that's going to attract people from all over, as we've been told, but it's showing up on this list. So, there's an example right there where there's a little fuzziness going on, right? Like, it's just not maybe as clear as day as we all think. And then under recreational, would that change Rocker Skate Park, or because they're over 10,000 of site disturbance or built environment? Like, that's a really weird one, obviously. That I'm sure we're all struggling a little bit with.
We're calling it facility size. So it's not site disturbance, but it's the size of the facility. And I believe it's maybe just around, it's not much over the 10,000, but.
Is that facility not including parking lot?
That was
a great question, Dan.
Yeah, this is a little bit of, that was sort of, I think, our thought when we were talking about it. But yeah, that's something we could clarify.
Was not including parking.
Right.
Because are they doing shared parking in the rest of the regional park? Or are they building their own parking?
So I think the notion on this one, because it is an oddball, because it's an outdoor facility,
right,
is a retail store of 8,000 square feet. You'd be looking at the square footage of the building, not the building plus the parking lot. So I think in this example, if you've got half pipes and skateboard features, it would be the area that effectively you can skateboard on, and kind of the circulation to access it would be the equivalent of the building, I believe was the thinking.
And what if we have a planned development? So it's the square foot screening criteria is the total facility size. So if we had a couple of like a little mini development, maybe like 7-Eleven, probably Blue Coyote, that's way bigger than 10,000 square feet. Maybe like half of that or something like that come in somewhere. And it included, they already had tenancy, right? For some of those, let's say there was going to be a membership or an Elks Club in 5,000 square feet of it. How would we treat that?
So
a 9,999 foot mini development, commercial development that had a local serving use already leased.
Oh, I think we'd have to look at it as a whole.
We'd look at it, okay. As a whole project.
Yeah.
And therefore, they would have to do a VMT analysis.
If we couldn't, if half of it is the Elks Club and the other half is something that we're not sure if it's local serving, we'd have to at least evaluate whether it was local serving. If it wasn't local serving, then we'd probably have to do a VMT analysis.
And approximately, do you guys know how much a VMT analysis is?
It's going to depend on project size. Larger projects are going to tend to be more expensive, but it could be $10,000 to $15,000 pretty easily.
Cool. I think that's all
Anything
my
else?
questions.
We can come back to
Thank you.
Councilmember Romack.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Pallavi. I had a lot of questions, kind of related to that rocker skate park sizing, building, outdoor area, so that clarifies that a little bit. And I was going to ask that same question about how much a VMT analysis is. So I think you ask all my questions. Thank you.
Actually, I did want to just make note, Becky and Dan, I just forwarded you another public comment that the council received from Susie Tarnay that I'm realizing didn't go to you, so I wanted to make you aware of that. Council Member Zabriskie.
Thank you. Right, I was going to mention the Tarnay comment as well. It came in at 5 minutes of 2. I think could explain why.
I was expecting something and I was wondering what happened, so thank you for that.
Just for reference, it's really helpful if those can be sent to Town of Truckee, because if our staff isn't here, we don't have access to individual staff members. So apologies for leaving that out.
Yeah, she did copy Judy, but yeah, she's not here.
Right.
Good point, though.
I noticed that too. So first, I want to make sure it's clear, and actually this goes to Susie Tarnay's comment. In order for an affordable development to be exempt, at least 75% of the units would have to be affordable, correct?
Correct.
I was wondering, when I look at the map, I was looking for this half-mile parallel lines on Donner Pass and Brockway, but the map isn't drawn that way. Can you explain why it isn't just parallel with Donner Pass and Brockway all the time?
The lines correspond probably to the transportation analysis zones that are in the model. So when LSC came up with this criteria, they ended up looking at all those TAZs that were kind of within that half mile. So it's not an exact half mile. That's why it was supplemented with a figure as well. But the TAZs that are in that area that's shaded green are the ones that the VMT or the trip lengths were 85% of the townwide average. So that's kind of the justification for that area.
Okay. Well, the ones that would be exempt in terms of distance would be those within half a mile on either side of these main thoroughfares, right?
It actually refers to the figure specifically in the threshold. So as long as it's in that area, that would be included.
Okay. Now, why did we pick 1/2 mile instead of 1/4 mile or a mile?
It went back to the analysis. I think they tested the 1/2 mile. I know that a 1/4 mile for like transit, that's a standard.
Right.
But when they kind of went through and looked at the different options, they were able to kind of find a pattern within 1/2 mile of those corridors.
What does Placer County do? Do you remember offhand? If you don't remember, that's...
I don't know if they have a specific exemption zone. I think they exempt affordable housing, though, and probably residential of a certain size. I can look that up.
Okay. You mentioned that in terms of housing, affordable units that meet the development code definition would be exempt, and then also income-restricted households. Does that refer to owner-occupied households that are income-restricted?
I think that was meant to refer to any type of, whether it's truly affordable housing as defined in the development code, but any type of some sort of other method that was incorporated into the project that would make sure that it was somehow income restricted. It was a way to, and Jen is here too, she can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it was a way to sort of include provide some flexibility if there was an income restricted model that didn't neatly fit into those affordable housing definitions. But as long as it was some sort of income restricted, it would qualify.
Well, so could that mean that a household that's making 300% AMI, or a housing development that's at 300% AMI that puts a cap at that amount would qualify for the exemption?
If the development, the housing development itself somehow documented or committed to renting to that type of household, it would qualify. I'm not sure if I understood your question.
Well, it sounds like I could put a cap on my housing development at, whether, let's say rentals, I'm going to cap it at 500% AMI. I just decided that I'm not going to rent to anyone that makes...
I don't think that's the intent. I think it's income restrictions that meet the affordability criteria for affordable housing is what the intent of that is. And if that's not clear, maybe we need to clean up the language.
Yeah, we need to clean it up, because I think that affordability is already covered when we say it has to be as defined in the development code. It'd be nice to clear it up. You might want to have it. I'm thinking of Hopkins Village, which was it's outside the town. It's in Placer County, but that was a housing project that was 180% AMI. I don't know if we want to make that an exemption or not.
We could. So the theory here is, I think the theory with housing is if it's a housing product that has a very high or extremely high likelihood of housing local residents that are using local services, that those are the types of projects we would want to exempt. Because the theory is we're not attracting trips from San Francisco or long distances to and from a new house that may not be occupied by local residents. I think that's the theory behind it. So if you as a council believe that projects that are restricted to a certain income threshold or below have an extremely high likelihood of housing local residents, then that would be a reason to exempt that type of a project from requiring VMT analysis as part of a CEQA review.
Yeah. Well, I see us discussing Kat's recommendation for workforce housing. I see a distinction between workforce and local. Like I'm local, but I'm not working.
Lucky guy.
Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Like it.
Anyway, so maybe that's something we want to discuss and maybe do away with income restricted and put in workforce and then figure out how to define it in a way that satisfies the council. I mean, that's something to talk about, I think. Okay, we answer my question. There's also, it says, on the mitigation, we just talked about mitigation in the kind of mitigation that can be done for the Rocker Park. It's correct that the mitigation combined with the project itself has to end up at 85% or less.
Right.
Okay, so when we look at the mitigation, it can't just be provide any kind of benefit. It has to provide a benefit that collectively with the project itself gets us in at under 85% of townwide average daily VMT. Okay. And then we measure the VMT on a summer day, a summer work day, is that correct?
Our traffic model is based on summer PM peak hour conditions. To convert to average daily VMT over the course of a year, there's some adjustments that need to be made to that. Now, I'll use the skate park as an example. So what would happen there is we would do an evaluation of the VMT of other outdoor recreational facilities, compare that to the VMT generation per unit on the skate park, and if the skate park is less than 85%, as we talked about before, then no further conversation needed. But back to, I think we would use the model, our traffic model, to help us evaluate that. If we're trying to convert from summer peak VMT to seasonal peak VMT, the adjustment factors for another outdoor recreational facility are probably going to be the same as for the skate park, if you will. So in that example, we would probably just use the summer VMT as the benchmark, if you will, because we're trying to figure out relative percentages as opposed to absolute values over the course of the year. So it gets way into the weeds, but there could be situations where that's not the case.
Okay. For a school that's closed during the summer, could the school use the average daily summer VMT for the school to show it falls under the 85%?
Yeah, it gets into when it's like that last week of August, first week of September, that's still technically summer, but school's open.
Okay, so we do it after Labor Day for the schools.
That's what we've done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Okay, and they'll be interested in hearing you. I was curious too about the cost of the VMT, and there was a description of it as a costly regulatory burden in one of the comments, and I don't know if that's in reference to it being $10,000 to $15,000 or something else, but.
I would expect that's what it was referring to, is the cost of performing the additional analysis.
And back on the school and this, so the VMT analysis is based on a summer day, a summer VMT. So when you said do it after Labor Day, I mean, in the past, what we've done is sort of, we've based it on that kind of, when it's still summer, but school's in session. So I just want to make sure that my response was clear.
Okay, good. No, thank you. Okay, the last question is in a way partly a point I want to make. I'm trying to understand just what we get out of complying with the state law. This is an obligation of ours imposed on us by the state, putting this together, but.
I think ultimately we get higher levels of defensibility of the CEQA review of projects. So if for instance, we just said, you know what, we're not going to adopt Vmt thresholds, and we were to review a project and find it consistent with CEQA, if there were opponents to that project that felt that the town's CEQA review was inadequate, this would give them something to point to and say, gee, the state CEQA requirements are that you evaluate for VMT. Town, you didn't do it, therefore CEQA analysis is invalid, and it would probably increase the vulnerability of a CEQA review for a project if we didn't take it through a VMT analysis, or through this policy have identified that it's exempt from the VMT analysis because it's been screened out.
Okay. I'm thinking in terms of our climate action plan, our general plan update, where we're looking at transportation as being the second largest source of greenhouse gases after the fossil fuels combusted in connection with buildings. And I'm trying to, if possible, can you tell me what impact our SB 473 might have on the overall reduction of transportation greenhouse gas emissions?
I probably can't give you that number, but the 15% reduction was based, it came originally from the OPR analysis, which is based on a significant amount of analysis that was trying to get towards the state greenhouse gas emission goals. And that all tied back to, when it was all said and done, what they determined is this 15% reduction was a path for them to get to the state goals.
And that's a statewide average that doesn't distinguish between communities that are mostly built out and those that still have a lot of developable land.
Okay. Correct. Okay. And the goal is that this policy will to some degree help guide development and types of development that are lower VMT producers. And to the extent that that happens, then that is less of a VMT increase going into the future, and then along with that, it should be less greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. Infill can provide reductions in other ways besides transportation emissions. Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, so in other words, we're laying out some future guidelines for developers to consider before they start drafting their plans.
Yeah,
and I would, they understand these thresholds and find a path forward with them.
Yeah, and I think the land use element of your general plan is a far more effective tool at guiding development than a VMT policy, but I think a VMT policy is one more thing that can help nudge folks in the direction of infill development as opposed to some outside of our infill areas.
Okay. I'm sorry, I still have a couple questions, and I think we're all challenged a little bit with the Rocker Memorial Skate Park one. So just as an example, to keep really easy numbers, if we were to assume that the existing skate park had 100 VMT a day, then the new skate park, if it has to go through this process, if they could show that they're not going to have any more than 85 to their site, that means between the two sites, they could have as many as 185 VMT.
Yes, and even to go, it's actually VMT per unit. So if you look at, let's say the existing skate park's 1,000 square feet, and it's generating 100 VMT. Let's say the proposed site is 2,000 square feet. So the VMT per 1,000 square feet is 100. So at the new site, the VMT per 1,000 square feet would need to be 85. But if there's 2,000 square feet, then it would be 170 VMT would be the threshold.
Okay.
So it's VMT per unit as opposed to per use.
That helps me reduce my angst on this one. I also I know that there's a lot of travel to the skate parks in Reno because the existing skate park is so overcrowded. So does that become part of the calculation as well? How many VMTs they would reduce from trips to Reno? Just like a grocery store trip.
Yeah, that would be appropriate as part of a VMT analysis. The other thing I'd say is if, the council is thinking that, that project should be exempt from VMT analysis, we could make modifications, I believe, to the staff recommendation in front of you to make that happen.
Well, and let's get into deliberation on it. I think I certainly have some concern over just a blanket exemption for any type of recreation, because I think there is possibility of new recreation facilities coming forward that could draw people from all over, kind of like our library, that we're excited about. But we do expect some of these facilities to draw in people. I know that one in particular will draw people from North Tahoe. So I think there's some nuances there. So with that said, let's get public comment and then maybe get into some more deliberation on it. Thank you. Yes, public comment. Come on up. You've got 3 minutes. Please state your name and provide a public comment card for us.
I think you know my name. I'm Susie Tarnay. Thank you so much. Thank you for clarifying why my comments have not been ending up in the public comment folder. So I will now try and address the email to the Town of Truckee at townoftruckee.com. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a button you can hit that says submit to council. And
I don't like to use the button because then I don't have a record what I've written. I like to submit by email.
I'll connect with you after.
Thank you. Okay. So the goal listed on the OPR guiding document of the state mandate to move from LOS to VMT is not only to track our environmental transportation impact, but to actually lower our greenhouse gas emissions. That is listed in the OPR document. The way our current regulation is written, we're kind of abdicating all responsibility and also the opportunity to create meaningful policy change away from our status quo of automobile-centric development. The current VMT exemption for all residential developments within 1/2 mile of a major transit corridor is too broad. Dan Wilkins himself said that we are assuming that these will have a high probability of housing local residents. Well, how it's written right now, you could have your 15% of your affordable housing, but you could have 85% short-term rentals in there right now. There's no restrictions against that. So these could in effect be operating as a profitable business larger than 10,000 square feet without doing any assessment of their transportation emissions. There needs to be a deed restriction on these exempted residential projects, either for locals only in perpetuity or a restriction on short-term rentals. To address the other stuff we've been talking about, that you were talking about, the 2 projects that were required to perform VMT calculations were both nonprofit organizations. I really think we need to explore an exemption for nonprofit organizations and open space projects, regardless of size. A side note on the schools not providing busing for the general population. Currently, none of the schools are providing busing, so the distinction is a little bit moot at this point. So I also find it very odd that on your chart there, you're exempting childcare centers, but not schools. They're the same thing. They have the same amount of traffic. That doesn't make sense. We need to figure out how to promote in-town alternative transportation use through discouraging excessive parking and encouraging commercial developments to invest in public transit. It would be more efficient if we could allow mitigation measures as a way to avoid VMT studies instead of spending the money on the study and then having to do the mitigation as well. So let's explore actual methods to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and stop subsidizing the automobile industry with private and public funds. I feel we're missing the mark on tracking and reducing our VMTs. And I think I'm all done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susie.
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Pallavi, I think you are incredibly lucky that Councilmember Henderson is not here tonight to hear you throw the library under the bus like that. Peter Fenolio on behalf of the Contractors Association, but today also as an advocate for our workforce housing needs in our community. And Councilmember Zabriskie, I agree there is a distinction between local and workforce housing. I think that's important to raise. We at CAT talk a lot about the heavy regulatory burden builders face, especially in the state, and the weight of that regulatory burden on the cost of housing. The goal of CEQA is to prevent environmental harm. It is not to put an undue regulatory burden on projects. So, I appreciate that Becky stipulated that the town can justify the findings for workforce housing as being not a significant impact to vehicle miles traveled. I think we outlined that as well in our letter, so I can maybe skip some of the jargon that lays that foundation here and maybe give us all a minute of our lives back. But to the clarity around defining workforce housing, I think I think it's the rationale for justifying that finding is substantially similar to the rationale for low-income housing. So I think a similar metric, and not that I'm really going to encourage you to ever make sausage from the dais, so I wish this would have been presented as an option in the staff report, but a 85% threshold of a project deed restricted to a workforce unit, I think is a good metric and substantially similar to the low income threshold that we use to exclude low-income projects from the VMT requirement. Low income's well established in our town code now between projects like Coburn Crossing and the Workforce Rental Grant Program. So I think the definition is there that you must be employed within the TTUSD school district, minimum of 30 hours a week. I think we should also, just as a more broad concept, consider, as we're talking about workforce deed restricted products, consider that a senior that has been living in that unit for a substantial amount of time, maybe 3 to 5 years of residency in that while they've been employed, if they then retire, you might want to consider that they be grandfathered into continuing to be able to live there. Other than that, I appreciate your consideration of this and hopefully look forward to you guys supporting the exemption of workforce housing.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Hello, if I just talk from here, is that okay? Awesome. Before I start, I just really want to thank all of you in this room. I know the past 18 months has not been easy, nor an easy time to run a town, so I really appreciate you guys showing up every day and doing your jobs. That means a lot to all of us. So just because I'm here, I just really want to say thank you. Second, I'm here, and I don't know if this is a moot point or not, because originally schools, public schools, were on the list, but my children go to Golden Valley Tahoe School, and I have been in education for several decades, and I kind of just want to speak on behalf of the children. I think Susie brought some of this up. I found it really interesting reading the report that the two things that were not exempt were both nonprofits. And I think they're also both things that really serve our youth in this community. And I really love that you guys are like, how do we get businesses to stay here? How do we bring in people to live here, to work in these businesses? I think that's all really important. But as a mother of kids, something that attracts me to a town are the services that the town provides for my children. And so, the skate park, I think that's an amazing place, and it's a great place for kids to find a healthy occupation of their time that brings meaning to their lives and passion, and parents want to see that in their kids. I also think that diversity of schools really attracts people, and as an educator, I think diversity of schools helps our children become productive citizens so they can come to these meetings and they can learn what we do. Public schools are amazing. They just don't meet the needs of all children, just like private schools don't meet the needs of all children. So the more options we have in this town, the better. I really respect that you talked about buses and having schools close to town. I'm not sure if you've looked at our town or tried to buy land in our town or tried to develop anything that involves a lot of land. There is not a lot of options. And so I think penalizing the development of outside of that corridor for resources that serve the community, whether it's a skate park that it seems like should be in that corridor, or a school that's located somewhere else. I would just really encourage you guys to look at the barriers you're placing while reducing barriers for all these things, which I really agree with. But a lot of these are for-profit businesses. So you guys have talked about the burden of the VMT study. I know that we paid $8,000 to the town of Truckee for the VMT study, and we are a nonprofit. Every penny we earn comes from the parents and comes from our community and people who support education in our community. And I support the idea of the VMT in reducing emissions. So I'm not here to be like, why did you charge us so much? But it is a financial burden for everyone. And I'm not saying that's not okay, but I would encourage maybe looking at these things and saying, can we use that financial investment in a different way? If you want to say they're exempt from VMT studies, then can you at least say, hey, you live on this corridor, we'd love to have buses twice an hour instead of once an hour. We'll take, instead of your 15 grand, we'll take 8 grand and we'll put it towards community transportation. Is there a way to... That's 3 minutes. Sorry, use that money to help the town. That's really all I wanted to say. Thank you guys.
Quickly state your name for the record?
Oh yeah, my name is Liz Shepard.
Thank you, Liz.
Sorry.
Okay. Is there any other public comment? Okay, seeing none.
I would like to address one thing that Ms. Tarnay brought up and that Ms. Shepard alluded to. We can't draw distinctions based on who is operating a use. We simply could not, in a blanket way, exempt any facility operated by a nonprofit while requiring a similar facility or identical facility operated by a for-profit entity to undergo CEQA analysis. That's simply not a tenable distinction when you're talking about who does and does not have to do CEQA analysis. It has to be based on the use and the traffic that it generates, not based on the operator.
That is very helpful. Thank you, Andy. Any other clarifications that need to be made?
The one, I know the conversation about the housing exemption, that was involved Andy and community development as well, and Danielle, when we were trying to. So we had received comments from Kat well before this agenda item was placed on the agenda about their continued request for a workforce housing exemption. We looked back at the council conversation a year and a half ago when this policy was put together. Very similar, some similarities in tonight's conversation as to what is the definition of workforce housing that we would automatically exempt. And at the time, there was some question as to what types of projects would actually be successful in hitting that target. And I don't know if Andy or Danielle can add to the conversation in terms of whether there's more clarity now than there was then as to the types of projects that we could define as being automatically exempt, because we're confident that if they meet certain criteria or have certain restrictions that they would in fact be workforce housing.
I can't add anything to that conversation. I mean, that's I think an issue for a traffic engineer, not for me.
Yeah, I mean, the definition of workforce housing is still something we're struggling with, although we have it defined in the development code. I think that's something that we need to further define and refine. So we haven't really kind of progressed any further than what's in the development code.
Does any of this go back, Andy, to a point you once made about a risk of workforce housing being subject to a legal challenge for that very reason, that it's limited to a local workforce?
I'm not particularly concerned with workforce housing per se. What does concern me is a scenario in which the town requires a percentage of all units built in the town to be restricted to locals only. I think that if we keep engaging in a practice of barring people who are not from here from living here, I think that does open up a potential equal protection challenge. That's something that has happened in the city of Davis. The city of Davis got sued over a senior housing project that had locals only restrictions. And so I think we've had some of that. I think that some people in the community would like to have us impose that requirement on all new projects as a way of sort of ensuring that there's housing for people that live here. But I would be very cautious about the town mandating that on every project going forward.
Well, that was also a nuclear-free zone.
Can I ask a quick question? do we have an appeal process? So, for example, I mean, what's sitting really awkwardly with all of us is the projects that have had to do a VMT analysis, just while they might be the ones that we're intending to have to do that, it just feels wrong in some moral way, right? Like, I think that's what one of the cruxes, at least that I'm struggling with. So is there an appeal process, for example, like an alternative equivalent type of process that we have in so many of our other ways, where a school or a rocker skate park, for that matter, can come in for I think our appeal fee is I should know this off the top of my head, but I'm forgetting. What's our appeal fee? It's like $750, right? Come on, I'm really close. To, have that happen at like the front end type of thing where, hey, like what Liz suggested, how about we take our $8,000 and we give you something else? Jenna.
Sure.
Welcome.
The Planning Commission appeal fee is it's about $700 or $800.
Okay.
So are you asking, could someone appeal the town's CEQA determination about what's exempt and what would require an analysis? Is that the question?
The question is, could they, I guess, unfortunately. No, I don't like it when you phrase it like that, Jenna.
Thank you for rephrasing that for him.
Okay, you're done up here. Just thinking out loud. Thank you. I'll pass for the time being. Move on to one of you.
Okay.
Struggle with this one.
Yeah, I struggle with a few of them up here.
Can I ask kind of a question related to both what Susie and Liz brought up about, instead of paying $10,000, $15,000 to do a VMT study, if they weren't exempt, could there be some sort of mitigation efforts where we would just say, if you pay X amount, I guess, though, it's a slippery slope, because what projects can do that?
It's a one-time fee, too, instead of an ongoing improvement.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Dan.
So to answer this question of, could the town create a VMT mitigation program that would be, I suppose, similar to our traffic impact fee program, right, where all development contributes to help implement a list of projects that should be VMT reducing? We think so, that we believe we could create that kind of a program. We also believe that depending on how aggressive you as the council want to get in that kind of a program, that dovetails with our general plan policies. So, for instance, if you as a council said, we want to see no increase in VMT, we want to see development happen in the community, but we want to see no net increase in VMT, then the list of projects to accomplish that is going to be much greater. If you as a council in the general plan say, we're okay with an increase in VMT over, we still want to allow for development, we're okay for some increase, but we don't want to see as high of a rate of increase as the status quo, then, so then instead of holding VMT at 0 increase, it's can go up by X%, and then the list of projects gets smaller. So that's one way in your policy setting role you can influence, how big is that list, which is then going to fall over into how big is the fee. Then the next variable will be, what size projects do you want that to apply to? So as an example, the traffic impact fee program applies to every development that happens, including single-family homes. If we're trying to develop a VMT mitigation program for only projects that aren't screened out of VMT analysis, that's going to be a much smaller universe of projects and funding than if it's something broader based that's attempting to capture all development. So the answer is, we believe that we can develop a program like that, and there will be some important policy questions that we would need to talk to you as the council about in terms of how aggressive or not we would want a program like that to be.
Can I ask, who would be responsible for determining what the townwide average VMT is per unit of development for the land use type?
That would be the traffic consultant that would do the VMT analysis, likely LSC.
Don't we have that?
Well, who would pay?
Oh, who would pay? Yes. That would be the project proponent. Are you talking about to test the thresholds, or are you talking about for the VMT mitigation?
I'm talking about for, I guess, both. I was looking at mitigation, but.
So for a specific project review, that would typically be the project proponent would need to pay any costs associated with the technical analysis necessary to perform the CEQA review, if it's a specific project like the school that we talked about. So in that example, the school, the town goes to the traffic consultant, says how much for the VMT analysis, they give us a quote, we review it, make sure the scope of work is right, pass that fee or that cost on to the developer. If we were going to develop a comprehensive townwide VMT mitigation program, I would expect that would be something that we as the town would fund through a future budget cycle.
I will add too that we are looking at this with the general plan update. So when we produced the briefing book for the land use alternatives, we did do VMT analysis, and all the alternatives that we're presenting do increase VMT. But that's exclusive of the future policies and strategies that we're talking about. So there's opportunity within the climate action element and the transportation element, pretty much every element, to look at those opportunities to kind of reduce town-wide based on how aggressive we want to be. So whether it's requiring mixed use, eliminating parking, requiring walking and biking facilities, those are all things that we can add in to make this balance, but we're not done with that process yet. So we're kind of talking about two different things in some ways, that we're trying to get through this discussion knowing that we're also trying to be more aggressive and looking at other opportunities with the general plan.
Okay, I'm thinking of the financial burden on the project proponent and wondering, and thinking for a large development, $10,000 to $15,000 is a cost of doing business. A cost that used to be external is now internalized. But for a small operator, would they have to pay $10,000 to $15,000? I mean, somebody with a 11,000 square foot commercial development, are they going to have to spend $10,000 to $15,000?
Yeah, so the town's policy related to development review has historically been that the project proponent should fund the cost of the technical work to review that project, as opposed to bringing tax subsidy in to help subsidize the review of a project. So that's been the historic practice of the town.
And incidentally, that's the practice in just about every city, because most cities don't want to spend taxpayer dollars to subsidize development.
So I think what you're seeing on the list up there is for projects that are less than 10,000 square feet that are on that list, they wouldn't need to pay that VMT analysis fee. And just by way of example, the Golden Valley School, it's about $8,000. So it's not at 10 or 15. So those folks on that list wouldn't need to pay for that. Anyone, a 15,000 square foot library, say, would need to pay the cost of the VMT analysis. So there is kind of that threshold where folks that are under that limit wouldn't need to prepare that study.
And it sounds like it's pretty much of a fixed cost. It's the same analysis whether you're a small operation or a big operation. You're going to have a lot of...
Not necessarily. I think it would be case by case. So a larger operation, like let's say the rail yard development we're coming through and had to do VMT analysis, I'm confident that the cost of a project like that would be significantly more than the charter school, as an example.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to maybe just pivot to housing, and that is simply that it still just doesn't sit well with me that we have a school and a skate park doing a VMT analysis, but a restaurant, bar, bank, regardless of profit, not for profit, any of that's sort of irrelevant to me at this point. I'm just sort of like still struggling with this use list and the fact that we're just deeming some of these okay, and then like, yeah, kind of what Liz and Susie keep referring to, we're like, screw the kids, whatever, we're gonna make them cost more, it's fine, whether it's a public school or private school. Like, it just doesn't sit well with me for some reason. So I'm gonna leave that one at that and maybe move on to housing, because I think, just to clarify my thought process on the housing piece, I would be open. I think we were not as far along or as sophisticated in our housing policy when we first were dealing with this issue, and we just were sort of like, I think I remember we were all just sort of like super glazed over by the end of this presentation, like, wow, you've really confused us, but we'll take what you're saying. To me, any housing project that either involves local restriction, deed restriction, any type of restriction that we are utilizing as part of said project, higher and above the basic inclusionary ordinance. So, if it's just a market rate project with 15% inclusionary housing, to me, that wouldn't cut it. So anything above and beyond whatever our existing inclusionary housing ordinance is at the time, and or in said zone, because those might change as we move both forward, I would be comfortable with moving in that direction. So one, I'm still leaving the question on, but housing, hopefully that gives us some direction there if we need it.
Thank you. Councilmember Pallavi. Do you guys want to reflect on those specifics so we can try to see what direction we're moving in?
Can I just get some clarification? Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
To Councilmember Pallavi's point about a market rate project with 15%, not worried about that. But because of density bonus law, that could potentially put most projects in an exempt category that have housing. So I think we were trying to be sensitive about which projects could be exempt without exempting everything.
So what wasn't? So I said anything that exceeds.
Right, but a density bonus project, if they're coming in and asking for, say, like the 80%, is going to exceed the 15%.
A density bonus project, if they're adding, but I thought the density bonus piece of it is not income restricted.
Instead of 15%, they decide that they want to do 100% affordable.
Right.
Right. So then they're going to get additional units on top of that, and we're saying that's fine. You don't have to do a VMT analysis. I just want some clarification.
I think this is why this subject is so confusing, because there's like 8,000 freaking variables that you're throwing at us, and it's really. It's just, to Pete's comment, like, we're sort of stuck up here without a lot of tools. I sort of feel like we're not you're giving us this sort of like list, and I don't feel great about the list, but we can, I can add things or subtract things from a list. I think on the housing piece, you're sort of leaving us a bit to dry, to be blunt.
Okay. The housing is 75%. 75% of the housing needs to be affordable. But that's what's in the existing rule.
Current threshold.
Right. And so I'm just basically saying, so are we expanding affordable, to Pete's comment, to say affordable can just include any type of restriction or not? Currently, we're saying it does not, right? So currently we're saying 75% of affordable at what AMI level? Help me.
Jenny, do you know off the top of your head with that one? I feel like it should be 120% below, because that's our definition.
Okay, so we're saying 75% of 120 or below, but yet we are literally crafting programs to go higher than that and provide other incentives. So that's not in alignment for me.
Maybe, can I just interrupt here for a minute? So we don't want to leave you hanging dry, and nobody wants you making sausage up there. So, this was based on previous council direction. I think what makes sense is if you can provide some broader direction, we can go back, develop something else, knowing you're interested in housing as an exemption, you're interested in whatever, and come back. So broader concepts, great.
Thank you for saving the day.
And if I could just add, we looked at it through the lens of VMT and greenhouse gas emission reduction. So while we certainly understand the feeling that you have about, oh, this is about kids, that really isn't the mandate from the state of California. And this goes back to AB 32, which is 2006. So, 15 years later, we're finally getting around to making this a reality. So we're looking at it not as, oh, is this a good project or is there a community benefit? But rather, does it create VMT above and beyond the 85% threshold? And in many cases, like the Golden Valley School, it may. And so that is why we are looking at it from that lens. And again, not through one of, is it a good project?
No, and I trust me, I get that. I just think a 5,000 square foot restaurant, I mean, we're going to exempt that, right? Like, that's what doesn't sit right to me. A 5,000 square foot school has to do a VMT analysis, but a 5,000 square foot restaurant and bar doesn't.
Right. And again, I think that was based on the analysis that we got from LSC.
So that's, I'm not debate. I agree with you 100%. I'm on board to reduce VMTs across this community. I just don't think this list sort of like does it for me. That maybe that's more of what I'm just simply trying to say.
In terms of staff direction, I understand everything that's in here, at least I think I do. I think the list helps because you're giving examples of things that would be exempt. It's not an exclusive list. It's just recognizing that some things don't even need to go through the process. And just other items, they go through the process. They aren't prevented from having their development. They're not necessarily going to have to mitigate. And I fully am aligned with what Jenna describes. This is about greenhouse gases, and whether you're a private for-profit or a private nonprofit, if you're emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, we need to reduce them because their impact doesn't depend on whether you're a do-good organization or a profiteer. The only change I see needing to make, of what I still think is imperfect, but for now, the only change I think we need to make is to add workforce housing, because as Kat eloquently explains, that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's kind of a no-brainer. Let's come up with a good definition. Let's figure out a definition and add it in. That's my guidance.
Are you agreeing with what I was saying, or?
I don't think so.
Okay, so
I had trouble understanding what you were saying. But
so on the housing piece of it,
we already have a definition.
Right, of the 120 sub. And so are you saying stick to that, or are you saying expand that?
I am fine with the housing. It's based on affordable housing, and the development has to have at least 75% of the total project housing affordable. And actually, I would get income restricted out of there because I don't know what that means. Affordable housing is income restricted.
So let's use an example of maybe one of the Yorger Ranch parcels that once we come out with our BMR program in 6 months, 8 months they come down the road, they don't do a single bit of 100% AMI, but they did a deed restriction on every single one of those units.
For workforce?
A deed restriction through the BMR program. So the deed restriction being this has to stay in the local workforce. Currently, Danielle, that would not fit the existing definition, and you're saying you're okay with that not fitting the definition.
No, I'm saying add workforce.
You're saying add.
Workforce housing.
I guess workforce is just what is not jiving with me, because
local workforce within the school district boundary.
Of any AMI level?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I think that's key.
Okay. So that's broader than what I was saying.
Yeah. And
okay.
I would agree with that.
It's similar to Coburn.
Yeah. Okay. And you look like you're ready to jump in.
I'm ready to jump in.
Councilmember Romack.
I would agree with that. I think leaving it open to workforce housing, no matter the income, you just brought up below market rate housing program. I see that as a perfect example. What if there are some CAT members that want to build 6 houses and they'll say, we'll deed restrict this to the below market rate program, and then boom, there you go. Don't do the VMT study. So,
and I agree with that. I'm
Yeah.
just being clear. I think we're all in agreement. You guys might be yeah.
I think we are.
Yeah.
And that's great. I think we're all comfortable with that pursuit for staff.
I do have a question kind of going back then. So if we're good on that for now.
I think so.
So going back to this rocker skate park, all this other stuff, I guess a question back is, when we look at our VMT, is it only VMT we're generating and is happening in Truckee? No, it's any trips. Because I guess I'm thinking, again, back to rocker. So if kids have to drive to Reno right now, so reducing a trip so they only drive 2 miles rather than 35 miles, does that matters even though it's going outside of our jurisdiction?
So the law requires that we look at VMT outside the town boundaries. And so I will say that that's true. I mean, you're not going to Reno, but it could potentially be drawing from North Tahoe and areas, the bike park, the skate park, those are all sort of regional amenities. And so that's why staff had concerns about including that in the automatic exemption. And same with the school and the charter school in particular. I mean, as Jenna's point, those potentially could be increasing VMT above the thresholds. And so, I mean, if we're going to come back with some housing, we'd probably also need to do some additional analysis to see if we can even justify any changes to this list or adding things to this list. If you want to pull things off the list, that's a lot easier.
Sure. So back to hold on that one. So back on that one, that with the trips out of Reno, is this VMT also considering the operation of that facility? So the teachers driving to the school, whether they're coming from Reno or from Truckee.
Yes,
the VMT includes that. Okay, and that makes sense because it really is vehicles traveling on the road. But then again, back to the Rocker Memorial Skate Park, it doesn't have anybody running that. So there's no employees coming to it every day. So that's going to help them in that calculation. But they still have to do the calculation. They likely wouldn't have any impacts to mitigate, but they would still have to do the calculation. But the school could end up with mitigation that they have to, or impacts that they have to mitigate.
Yeah, either of them could end up with impacts, or either of them may be, through the analysis, determined to be below the threshold.
Okay. All right. I think I'm clear on, what exactly it is that we are calculating and achieving with this target of the 85% less vehicle miles traveled. So I'm a little bit more comfortable with that. And I think we have the housing thing done. The short-term rental discussion, as much as I would love to find a way to make short-term rentals do vehicle miles traveled, it's just, because if it's a hotel, obviously a hotel's not on this list. If we build a hotel, that's going to be drawing in people from outside our area. Obviously, they're going to have to do a VMT study, and they're going to have trips, and they're going to have to mitigate it. But at this point, we have no way of applying that same theory to a short-term rental property.
Yeah, at this point, we're just talking about projects that are subject to CEQA review. Mm-hmm. If you as a council, as part of a future work program, directed us to develop a more comprehensive community-wide VMT mitigation program, if you want to get down to the level of single-family homes, an example could be that when you get a short-term rental permit, that there's this recognition that, okay, now you're bringing people in, so there's a VMT mitigation fee to be paid. So if you wanted to go down that path, there would be a mechanism to do that. But again, that would be subject to, really the policy direction of the council as to how far down the path you want to go.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask one more super quick question?
Yeah.
I swear. can these local land use types be confined to the half-mile radius of Donner Pass Road instead of community-wide?
Yeah, so I think if the council's determination is that you're because what you're deciding is, gee, we're comfortable enough that these projects will absolutely be below the 85% threshold. And if you're feeling uneasy about that, if you will, on a community-wide basis, and you were feeling, I think from a technical perspective, the closer that these types of facilities are to existing transportation facilities, the greater the likelihood is that the VMT generation is going to be less, right? So I think we could, if you were to want to do that, it wouldn't require a lot of technical analysis to support that kind of a determination.
Right, because as Dan said, it's easy to shrink the exemptions or to remove things from the exemptions.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say the exemptions were shrunk both geographically and also potentially use-wise, and then we can talk about adding or subtracting after that. But I guess I would feel more comfortable I don't know how you guys feel, but I would feel more comfortable applying that same geographical zone as an overlay on these uses than having it be town-wide. And to me, that seems like middle ground, at least from my own thought process. But again, if they're willing to come back to us and let them hammer it out internally a little bit and come back to us with some options, I'm super supportive of that. Thank you.
Yes. Can we just say yes? What are your thoughts on that?
I like that idea a lot because if someone wants to build a restaurant way far up in Tahoe Donner, it's probably not even allowed land use wise. But yeah, that would generate a lot more VMTs, but doing it where everything already exists and there's transit, I like that idea.
Councilmember Zabriskie?
I'm fine with
Mike?
Staff exploring that.
Can you turn your mic on?
I'm fine with staff exploring that. I want to see what they come back with.
Okay.
I'm neutral on the concept.
That along with the housing, locals, or workforce housing, not locals. I'm going to have to really focus on correcting myself on that.
Just to clarify, is that concept to if it's not in the kind of exemption zone, there is no threshold? So if it's a 5,000 square foot non-residential outside that area, or are we just talking about applying the local, if it's in this list? Or maybe we're coming back to you with a menu of options. Okay.
Menu of
options.
I think the menu is definitely a little bit of what we're asking for, and maybe just a couple of examples to help solidify that concept. But I mean, what I was saying was I think what you first said, which was these are fine being the local screening, right? And so as long as anything listed there is under 10,000 square feet and is within the half-mile radius, they can proceed without VMT analysis. Anything on this then outside the half-mile radius, I think that's what, right now I'm saying no square footage limit, but yeah, maybe we drop it to 5 or something like that. Right?
Yeah.
As a balancing act, right? So we say, fine, if you want to come in with a 2,500 square foot something, it's small enough or whatever. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
So a hotel within half a mile would be exempt?
No.
It depends if they're under 10,000 square feet.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, they're not on this list. I take that back. No, well, they're not on this list currently.
They're not, and currently it specifically says in the residential exemption that hotels aren't included.
Right. But something to consider, since we're all talking about short-term rentals, is the more hotels you get, the less pressure on short-term rentals there are. So sometimes incentivizing a hotel might be the right way to go if your goal is to disincentivize a short-term rental. Just putting it out there.
Just your little side.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I don't quite understand what this other item is we're asking staff to research, but if staff understands, I'll wait.
So
they come back with it.
So I think what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, is council would like staff to come up with a definition of workforce housing that could also be exempted from VMT analysis. So that would be one item. And as it relates to uses that are automatically screened out, identify that this list of uses that's on the screen would apply, but only if they are within a half mile of a major transportation corridor, or it would be the same. It would actually be the same map that's being used for the residential screening, is my understanding.
Yeah.
And my understanding also is that wouldn't preclude, let's say there's a use that wants to go in out in Glenshire that we can look at and say, that's going to reduce VMT. It's like a new pizza place or something. So, it's something, so you no longer have to drive from Glenshire to downtown Truckee to get a service. You can now get it.
Pizza's the only thing we have in Glenshire, just to be clear, Dan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Taco place, right.
And it's a pretty good pizza place because I'll drive there from Prosser.
But there could be, because this concept of neighborhood serving commercial that reduces the need to leave Tahoe to Honor to come to other parts of town. You could have examples of that are further away than that are outside of those geographic zones that we also would want to capture, I think. So I think what council's asking us is to come back to you with updated screening criteria, and we would likely be doing that after the holidays, given other items that are in the pipeline.
Yeah, that's fine. Agreed. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay, you good?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You have the direction you need then?
I think so.
Wonderful. Can we call that one complete?
For tonight?
So.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations, everybody. That was a tough one. Okay, we are just down to council reports. You want to jump in?
Oh, sure.
I'm going to turn your mic on, though.
Calendar, though. I don't have my council reports ready. When did we last meet?
2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago. I have... what have I done? Went to the housing grand openings. That happened. Good job, everybody. Great job if Shauna's watching. Great job, Mayor Klostad. That was a fantastic event. And other than that, it looks like I haven't done attended the CCC meeting. And I think that's about it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Romack?
I also attended the housing ribbon cutting and tour. That was fantastic. And Mayor, I really appreciated your remarks at the beginning and honoring our Indigenous people. I thought those were very appropriate, especially since we all celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day yesterday. Also attended the Transportation Management Association monthly meeting and did an interview earlier today on 101.5 Truckee Tahoe Radio. You have to say it all, with Councilmember Zabriskie just talking again about our coffee coming up on Thursday morning at 8:30.
Excellent, thank you.
Boy, I agree with my other council members. That was a fantastic ceremony honoring the affordable housing. The people that put it together and managing to bring in so many state officials, I think is really valuable in many ways. I went to a transit and polling meeting with Lindsay, described that before, attended the Truckee North Tahoe Transportation Management Association meeting that focused largely on the results of the summer programs, the TART Connect and the fixed bus routes. And I think that's going to be very helpful information for us moving forward on our future transportation projects. I met with Christy Morrison, a realtor, who had sent in a comment and then also made a verbal comment on STRs at our last meeting. Spent about an hour with her because she sent me yet a second email after our meeting, and I just found that valuable as we move down the road trying to decide how we're going to address STRs. And the radio interview was a lot of fun with Lindsay. She's the old pro, so I just tried to take my points from her. And then there was Good Morning Truckee this morning with Kevin Smith speaking on behalf of the airport. He made an excellent presentation and noted that their staff monthly holds an hour public forum where it's an opportunity for members of the community to pose questions, I suppose complain as well, but get input and interact with staff in a public sphere without a Brown Act situation, which sounds like a good program. And I think that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, the ACT Council.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, yes, I will just jump right in with the Truckee Affordable Housing Fest. It was a great success. I actually got Google notifications that it was covered in, of course, Truckee, Reno, Sacramento, San Francisco, and Kansas City, Missouri, of all places. So I think what we're doing up here is pretty special, and people are recognizing it. And I, again, just want to thank all the staff that contributed to that project or that event and everything that led up to it. I also met with Alfred Knotts and had a great conversation about all of his personal experience with a lot of the things that we kind of have on our wish list, and that was very exciting in terms of transportation, multimodal transportation, and alternative transportation for our community and region. I attended the CCC meeting, which was focused on cycling trails and also alternative transportation modes. So a lot going on in that sector. Our GHG group that I've been talking about forever, we finally gave ourselves a name. And it really rolls off the tongue. Carbon Zero Truckee Tahoe Alliance. Yeah. And we are meeting every other Monday for a couple hours, and we're going to be hopefully doing a little op-ed here soon to explain more of what we're doing. And then, of course, Good Morning Truckee this morning. That was very informative about the Reno Tahoe airport traffic and what kind of things they're doing to bring more people here. And I couldn't help but to think about how that's impacting us. And our local airport is doing tremendous things to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that was one thing that was loud and clear, that there was a bit of a disparity there in terms of the awareness of that. And hopefully they'll start thinking a little bit more along those lines as well. So with that, the next meeting is the 26th, right, of October, 5 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We are adjourned.